of our research group. I wanted to say a few words before opening this day. This is a very important day with a lot of important contribution. In the last day of May, day 31, in Nature, it was published an article about safe and just Earth system boundaries. It is interesting because the concept of Earth system boundaries was combined one time more with the issue of justice. The idea of Earth system boundaries should be not just important on the side on the side of the environment as safe, but also should be just. And to be just and safe, these boundaries should be combined three elements of justice: justice between species, justice between generations, and justice between state, communities, and individuals. And this is very important when we look for alternatives for justice, and alternative justice in climate issues, and especially on the topic of fossil fuel transition. We need for transformative intervention, we need to overcome the injustice caused related or process related or effect related, as a colleague of us from China, Bao Jihe, published recently in an article on a special issue. Justice should combine issue of epistemic justice related to the knowledge, not only scientific knowledge, but the knowledge of people, the experiencing knowledge, the experimental knowledge, the real knowledge in many different cultures. Our colleague Luna Kirfan focused on some topics of climate justice, the distributive justice in terms of equity among peoples, the issue of recognitional justice, recognizing difference, recognizing culture, recognizing that exists only the scientific technological vision, but there is a multiplicity of vision to deal with the challenges of our times. And the procedural justice, it means including people in the process of take decision for change, take a decision for inclusive change. So today we focus on mutual and transformative practices for change. Transformative, not just greenwashing, but deep change, transformative change, and the mutual change in terms of cooperation among individuals and groups, humans and non-humans, for change. We need, the big challenge is to exit the fossil fuel paradigm. And in these last years, we had many time meeting with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty as a very important challenge action to deal with leaving behind the fossil fuel. Leaving fossil fuel underground, it needs a multitude of actors, a multi-situated place to act in order to move to what we call the Yasunization of Earth. It means transforming the Earth in something different from the fossil fuel vision. So today I want to open this fifth conference, giving the floor to Pedro Bermeo of Yasunidos, because the 20th of August in Ecuador, it happens the first referendum in the world in which citizens can decide to leave fossil fuel underground. It was not easy to arrive now. He can briefly trace this history and also to share with us this important achievement. Pedro, from September, will be also student of our international master program on climate change, diversity, sustainable territorial development. This is a very unique master program open to activism in order to combine activism and science in this important challenge. Thanks, Pedro, to be here, and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Massimo. Hi, everyone. Thanks to invite me. For me, it's an honor to be here. I would like to share my screen. Well, I don't have a special presentation to you in English, but I'm gonna try to translate everything and do it very quickly to be in time. But as Massimo said, for us, it's very important what is happening right now in Ecuador because of this referendum. That is a referendum very special because it's the first one that borns in the citizens. It's not a referendum that made a politician or a president but it's from the people. So for achieve this, we needed to struggle 10 years in different instances where we got at least 2 frauds from the politicians in turn that take us this possibility. So right now we are working on this campaign to promote yes to this referendum. The question that we are putting in referendum is the next one is that is in Spanish, obviously, but what it says is that if you agree to that the Ecuadorian government maintain the oil underground of the 43 block in the ground. That is like the synthesis of the question, and it's very important, this place, because as you will see, Yasuni is a very special place in the Amazon, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, then that is known as the most biodiverse place in the world. Yasuni was one of the places that in the age of ice didn't get frost, so it became like a refugee for all the species, and that's why it has these levels of biodiversity. So well, it's in between two rivers, in the Napo River and Curaray River in the Amazon of Ecuador. It's like 982 hectares, and is also a biosphere reserve from the UNESCO. Well, this is important. This is the one of the studies that is been made in Yasuni that shows that is the most biodiverse place in the world. You can see there that we have different groups, amphibians, birds, plants, mammals, and all these groups are concentrated in Yasuni. So as you can see, this is the Ecuadorian Amazon, and in this point is where we are wanting to maintain the oil underground. So it is very important because of this. We have a lot of mammals, as I said. We have also a lot of birds, amphibians, fish, reptiles, and insects. A lot of insects. We have more plants than in this place. In 1 hectare of this place, we have more plants and trees that in the whole North American continent. This is, and there is also well, we are working in this project for many reasons, but one is because of the biodiversity. You know, the biodiversity is important for pollination, for the water cycles, for medicine, and for a lot of and other reasons, and we are struggling to show this to the people right now, that we have a big campaign of the oil companies and the government against us, and also showing the climate crisis that is happening in the whole world, but also in Ecuador. Here we have three natural disasters that we know that they are not natural, that are related to the fossil fuels. So, for example, right now in the coast, we have big problems also in the city, in the capital, all related with this climate change. Also in Yasuní, we have a very special group of humans that the name is Tagaeri Taromenane, that are known as isolated indigenous, and also Waorani, Quichuas, Shuar, and this group of isolated indigenous that the name is Tagaeri Taromenane, and also Duga Kaeri. This is a house of Duga Kaeri, for example. And in this territory, we have also oil, as I said. So they are wanting they are exploiting all this territory for many years, but we are working to maintain the heart of this territory, that is Yasuní ITT, known as 43 block. And well, here's like a little bit of graphics, so you can see how is the story of Yasuní. Because of the time, I won't tell everything. Just gonna pass this. But here's how the blocks that we have in Yasuní. Many decades we have all these blocks, and what we are doing is struggling just for this block. That is there, the 43 block. That is the heart of Yasuní. It's very important for the lives of the people that lives there in isolation mainly. And so we have there like 3 reasons. First, climate change, also the biodiversity, but also the people that lives there in isolation. This is what they are doing there. This is a road that they say that is a sendero ecológico, but obviously it's not. This is a mechero of Eden that is also in Yasuní. This is the block. This is also block 43. And this is the road that I was saying. Here we have a map that shows all the threads that we have in Yasuní ITT and Yasuní in general, that are related to the oil buildings and infrastructure related to this. So there's a lot of impacts with the oil extraction. Also, the oils, what it have bring to Yasuní is deforestation, oil spills, contamination, lost biodiversity, and a lot of poor and inequity, violence, deaths, everything related to the oil extraction. So that's why we are working for this referendum that, as was said, I said before, we are working 10 years ago on this, and it was a struggle, a giant struggle against oil companies and the 3 governments that we have in these 10 years. Any government want to keep the oil underground for obvious reasons. So I think it's very interesting what is happening right in Ecuador, because even if they didn't want to, now we have this referendum. Even the political class didn't want to have this referendum to maintain the oil underground. We did a kind of bypass to the politics, to the traditional politics, and now we have this process that is democracia directa, direct democracy, and we can win the first time in the world to maintain the oil underground, even if the politics are against. So I think this is a very important thing, a historical thing that we need to share in the whole world and replicate in where we can. I want like tell about all the things that we need to do to achieve this referendum. But what is important now is that we have a campaign against a big campaign against the consultation about against the referendum, mainly as I said, with the money of the oil extraction companies, with the mining companies, with the government, and they are saying that we're gonna lose a lot of money, that this is very that is terrible for the economy of the country, and that we wanna lose dollarization, for example, and things like that are not true. That they're saying a lot of lies, and that's why it's very important to ask right now to the international community that help us in this campaign to show the truth of what is the most important thing. That's not the oil that we have underground, but the life that we have above. So that is like a very fast resume, because I know that I don't have enough time to explain these 10 years of struggle. I don't know if we can like open a moment of questions, or how it works, the format.
Thanks, Pedro, for your contribution. A couple of questions before moving to the next topics. What are the main opposition about this campaign? What are the support by citizens, indigenous group, farmers, etc.? How is the situation at the moment?
Well, at the moment, as I said, we have against all the oil companies and these traditional politics, but in favor of the consultation, we have the indigenous movement, CONAIE, that is the most important indigenous, I think, not just in Ecuador, but in the region. Also the Nacionalidad Guarani, that is the owners of the place, the traditional owners of the place, and also the Confeniae, that is the Amazonic indigenous movement. So we have the support of the indigenous, we have the support of the majority of the people by I don't know how to say, encuestas shows that most of the people gonna vote yes to preserve Yasuni. But we are in this struggle because there is a lot of all the media, the big media here are saying that we are losing a lot of money, that is a huge problem for the economy, and we need to keep extracting the oil in this place that is very important for the Ecuadorians. But we have more than 50 years of oil extraction, and we see that the Amazon region is the poorest of the country. So I hope that that we win this consultation, and we can send a message to the world that even if we are a poor country in the Amazon, in the South American continent, we can maintain the oil underground, and to show all the people that is working on different things related to the climate, that we have these options in participative democracy, and we can do this bypass to the traditional politics with this.
Thanks again, and our compliments for the resistance, because this referendum was achieved after 10 years of fight, especially juridic fight against the tentative of the juridic administration to limit the space of this referendum. Many thanks to be here, and we wish the best result, because this is not just an internal issue of Ecuador, but a very important example of alternative policies from below, from citizens, to maintain territories, to keep the issue of climate justice, etc. Many thanks, and a big hug to all the movement of Ecuador. They are doing something very important to everybody, and I think international community should support this very important phase. Thanks, Pedro. Then we move to the next contribution. We want to share with you some activities done in this 3 year of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. First of all, I give the floor to Edoardo Crescini from the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence about the activities of communication and dissemination at the center.
Yes, thank you, Massimo. Good afternoon to all. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, perfect. So now, briefly, I will show the communication and dissemination, not only of the events, but also the topics and the news that, as Center of Excellence, we moving in these 3 years. We have different communication channels: Facebook, Twitter, MailChimp, YouTube, but the core one is the website that you can find the link in the chat. In the website, there is a dedicated section on the news where we disseminate not only our event like this one, but all the international conference and conference in which we are participating in this 3 year, but also international report, that the one of the IPCC assessment report, or scientific publication, the most relevant one, like the last one on WESB, and the updating of materials, which are all in an open access form, like the slide and video of the different conference. In fact, the international conference is like the most important events that we organize as a center. Inside the website, you can find a dedicated page for all the conference through a registration on our website. All the materials are available in an open access mode. So also today, all the presentation we are upload in our website, and it can be possible to consult it in an online way, but also download it. And on YouTube, you will find all the video in English. The first conference we organize is in the 1st of June 2021, where we presented the conference, so with some institutional opening, but also the presentation of the aims and objectives of this Center of Excellence. What is the Jean Monnet initiative, with the presence of José Lourenço Valles of the European Commission. And then we have an important keynote speaker, Vandana Shiva, who in the morning talking about the importance of respect, preserve and restore Mother Earth and natural ecosystem, instead of consumption of the natural resources in an irrational way, before the consequence of our inaction will be irreversible. And then in the afternoon, all the scientific committee of our center present the different topics and research. And in the final part, we are inviting a different organization, and where they can talking about their activities and demand. So in this structure, you can see, as today we try to create an hub of communication between academic research, keynote speaker of relevant figure in the international debate of climate justice and climate change, but also organizations that are trying to demand, but also fight for rights and climate rights, but also human one. Then in the same year, we organized before the COP in Glasgow a second international conference talking about the difference between carbon zero and carbon neutral. Here we presented the fossil fuel operation treaty with Argentine. There is also the presence of Chase Aronise, indigenous leader of United States, the tribe Sioux, that presented their fights against the pipeline. And then there is also Mikey Becker, who is one of the researchers of the carbon budget. Then in the second year, we have the third conference, which is the first of 2 days. In the first day, we're talking about climate justice in the future cities or in the cities. And then in the second day, we present the just and equitable criteria to leave fossil fuel underground, with also the first occasion to talk about to develop and implement a roundtable session related to the 5P of Sustainable Development Goals. And we try to reflect with different stakeholders on these criteria to define the geographical area where it's most important to keep the oil underground. And then in October, we are talking about, before the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, we are talking about gender intersectionality and climate justice with different figures from Isabella Angelowski, which is a researcher in Spain, from Mitzi, which is a climate activist for Friday for Futures Philippines, till Alice Buckink, which is a European parliamentarian of the Greens group. Then with the other social, like Facebook, we used to update our follower in a relation of different topics. Of course, events like international conference, but also, for example, every month we publicate the climate bulletin of Copernicus, the program Copernicus, related to surface air temperature. During the COP, every day we post an update about the implementation happened in the different area of the COP, with the different according that are moving on. And also we suggest different digital tools where it's possible to figure out some future scenario or obtain data to investigate specific topics, as the one related to carbon climate global carbon atlas of Global Carbon Project. Then the Twitter, that I think it's one of the most relevant communication channel for us, because it gives us the occasion to enter and create a worldwide network. In fact, from Twitter, we also enter in contact with the different speakers for the international conference. We are disseminate virtual course like the one offered from Universidad Simón Andina Bolívar, or our present in different events, like the one to launch the World Congress of Climate Justice in Milan of this October, and then the most relevant and important scientific publication in this during this period. So updating always the most relevant scientific publication. And then we have a newsletter, a quarterly newsletter that during 3 years we send it to our subscriber, which are now like certainly 500, where we update and disseminate all the news, events, materials, and all other information and communication that stay around our Center of Excellence. Thank you for the attention.
Thanks, Edoardo, to share this activity of communication. It is very important. I'm very happy also to remember that the first conference in June 2021, we had Pedro Bermeo of Iasunidos, presenting the issue and advancement of the campaign for the referendum. So it is a very a good result after 2 years to know that this campaign achieved the referendum. Okay, I let the floor now to Daniele Codato, Cristina Ta, Daniele Vezzelli to discuss about the issue of good practices for climate justice and the tools of MOOC for communication and education. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Massimo. Hello to everyone. So, as said Professor De Marchi, this is like a shared presentation because a lot of people, of students, master degree students, professional master students, worked on and is working on the activities on the in the Climate Justice Center and develop the different activities and create different output. I don't want to call this like final output because as Professor De Marchi mentioned before, previously, we are a research group that since many years has been working on these topics, okay? So we then focus these topics in the center, but we want to go on with these activities and the production of the output for, I hope, many years. So in this case, in our presentation, I will focus on the research activities and didactic and literacy activities, mainly related to oil and gas interaction with biocultural diversity and the geographical criteria and the mapping of best practices as a research activity. And on the 2 MOOCs, the massive online open courses that we prepared in these years. Okay, so all these, I started with the geo platform set up by the center, the Monnet Center of Excellence on Climate Justice geo platform, where that is one of the 2 main windows of the center, because the first one is the website mentioned by Edoardo, but we have also set up this platform that is in continuous development. And in this platform, we want to share all data, maps, and so on, all the production of our center. Moreover, this is a very interesting platform because it's based on open source software. And this platform is very interesting, and we chose this because people, users, can use this platform to share their own data, create their own map using the spatial data and so on available inside the platform, can share documents, and so we would like to create this like shared platform open to everyone, okay? Not only to see the results of the center, but also as a space of sharing knowledge about climate change and climate issues, okay? And this is an example of, for example, as I mentioned, one of the output, the continuous output is the production, the search, the data mining, and the analysis of spatial data about oil and gas activities, projects, and so on, and their interaction and relationship with the biocultural diversity. So, for example, this is a map that we recently prepared for the platform, where you can see for UK all the elements that we found concerning oil and gas, and then the relationship with, in this case, protected areas, but it's not the only one. We have a lot of, we analyzed the different places in the world, like Ecuador or the world Amazon, Italy, and so on. And so this activity will go on, I hope, for the next years. And in this case, for example, this map and the data mining and analysis was carried out by Daniele Vezzelli in his master degree thesis, where he worked mainly on this idea of to find, to collect, to share geographical criteria to to define unburnable carbon areas, so areas where oil activities should be stopped, or where not to take fossil fuels underground, so to leave fossil fuel underground for a right and a just phasing out. So I leave the floor to Daniele Vezzelli, because this is mainly his master degree thesis activity, so I think it's important to listen his words. Please, Daniele.
Thank you, Daniele. Thank you for introducing me. Thank you for the introduction. So I will briefly introduce this part of the research of the center that we are conducting. It's a work in progress, and I will start from two assumptions. The first is that an equitable and fair phase out of fossil fuels cannot be achieved in the short term, but with a gradual and managed pathway that will consider not only economic efficiency, but also social and environmental aspects. The second is that we live in a world with a limited carbon budget. So there is a need to identify and operationalize criteria in order to develop between countries and within countries analysis. And this analysis will allow us to rank countries and or areas inside countries on the basis of the efforts that these countries or these areas are required to deliver to achieve an equitable transition. In other words, we are trying to answer several questions. For example, which countries are expected to leave the largest part of their reserves in the ground? Or, for example, which countries are expected to transition first? And then to within country scale, which areas should transition first? What we intend to do is to prepare an online survey in order to identify these criteria and weigh their importance in a participative way, based on the people perception and opinion. And once identified, this criteria will be operationalized by developing multi-criteria analysis, both at within country and within country scale. And the resulting scenarios will help us to foster and support the debate on climate justice, but also they will allow us to visualize the efforts that the countries or areas are required to deliver in order to achieve a just phase out of fossil fuels and a just transition. That's all. So thank you very much for attention, and I give again the floor to Daniele.
Thank you, Daniele. And so this is, for example, this is one of the first attempt to is a publication that we made at the end of 2022 about a simulation of multi-criteria analysis for Ecuador, where we can see that, for example, here block 43 is a very important block that should stay untapped, because together with all the blocks around Yasuni and Biosphere Reserve and around the intangible zone for indigenous people, okay, because here, okay, there is maybe a huge amount of fossil fuels underground, but the biodiversity and cultural diversity is so huge is that we should stay, the reserve should stay untapped. This is, of course, multi-criteria analysis let us to combine different kind of criteria, geographical criteria, climate justice, economical criteria, and so on. And this is the work that we are carrying out with this work, and the criteria that could be shared, could be prepared by different people and weighted by different actors, different stakeholders. Another activity that we are carrying out is this the mapping of best practices, i.e. different best projects, best initiative that can concerning climate justice and environmental justice also. We are carrying out this because we think that is important. Okay, we can set when can decide where not to take oil underground, but we have also we need also alternatives. We need also alternative project for these areas. So we thought to map best practice around the world using a form, online form, and this is my best practice form in different languages. Okay, shared by with the Geo platform, and then here create maps that where we put all after erasing of the duplicate and so on. We would like to share with everyone these best practices as a sort of map, of a worldwide map for where people can see and can consult this kind of practices. Okay. And last but not least, or least but not last, I don't remember, this is the MOOC. Okay, this is the more didactic or activity that we carried out in this last more or less 2 years. So the preparation of 2 massive online open courses for everyone, so free and open to everyone. One more related about climate change and adaptation in ecosystem societies, and the other one on GIS science for climate justice. And the idea here is to improve spatial climate change and climate justice literacy of citizens. So to give tools, instruments, and didactic material for all citizens that want to improve this kind of literacy. Okay. So we prepared 2, these are in Italian, at the moment are in Italian because they are for people living here in our country. And the first one is dedicated to climate change, to adaptation, to different mechanism of adaptation, to mitigation, and also on the climate justice concept. And the second one is dedicated to tools that can help us to carry out projects concerning climate justice. And mainly the second one, this MOOC on climate justice, on science for climate justice, was developed. So the face and the voice that will listen, you will hear in this MOOC is of Cristina Tapp. So I leave the place on the floor on to Cristina Tapp, please.
Thank you, Daniele. Okay, let me guide through the structure of this MOOC. The MOOC was taught in 5 modules, plus 1 module that contains the introduction of the main topic related to climate justice, and explain how to use in the best way this MOOC. From module 1 to 5, we have the core of the MOOC, that each module was taught independently from the other, but the order will drive the students step by step through the process that they need to carry out when creating maps. In particular, module 1 and 2 try to answer to the question how can I collect data in a participatory way, or where do I find data that I'm not able to collect in the field. Then module 3 explain how to store data and how to create interactive maps that can be shared online through the climate justice atlas that is built on a GeoNote platform. Then module 4 explain how to create maps using Google Earth Pro, and the last module, the practical module, the module 5 explain some tools to create story maps in order to use the communicative power of maps to give voice and strengthen the narration of projects and fights. promoted by citizens and civil association. The last module, module 6, is more theoretical and contains a collection of materials such as books, movies, and documentaries that helps to reflect on the main topic of climate justice. Each module is structured in the same way. At the beginning, there is a graphical abstract that resumes the main content of the modules, main skills developed, and tools explained. And then there is the case studies where students are asked to solve a real-life challenge. And then there are videos that explain the tools that they need to employ and use to solve the case studies. Each video comes with a PDF that resumes the content of the video, and at the end of the module there is, in some case, there are supplementary materials that are links to do more in-depth analysis related to the tools explained in the module, or to other instruments and platforms that can be used to do the same processes. If the students want to receive a certification, at the end of each module, they have to complete the final test.
Thank you. Thank you, Cristina. And so, really, we received a lot of, a huge number of unexpected requests mainly for the MOOC on science and for climate justice. So we decided to switch the MOOC in two platforms. One, the Moodle platform of Padua University, that is already operative, and where people, Padua University students can enjoy the MOOC, can join the MOOC and enjoy the MOOC. And I hope available soon. We will upload the MOOC on EduOpen, that is another Italian platform for MOOC, because it is easier for every user to join the MOOC and to obtain and then to follow the MOOC and then to obtain the certificate. So this is a platform especially set up for MOOC. So we decided to put our MOOC here because of the huge amount of requests. And so it will be available soon. We will communicate to everyone interested when it will available. Okay. And grazie per l'attenzione. This is all. Thank you.
Thanks for this presentation. I let the floor now to Francesca Peroni of Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. She gives us an overview of the publication and production, scientific production at the center in these 3 years.
So thank you very much. I share my screen. Just 1 second. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, everyone, to be here. So I'm Francesca Peroni of the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, and today I will present you the scientific results of the Jean Monnet Center. So I will focus on the main research activities. I will focus on 4 main topics from the research activities of our Jean Monnet Center and of our research group, from urban sustainability to oil impacts in the Amazon rainforest. Then I will move on the scientific articles that we published during these 3 years of Jean Monnet Center. And then I move on the special issue related to climate justice, but in the urban context. And finally, I will conclude with the two books of the center. The first one related to drones and geographical information technology in agroecology, and the second one related more in general to climate justice. So as a research group, we mainly worked on two main topics. On one side, the social environmental impacts on oil extraction in the Amazon rainforest and the alternative scenarios. And on the other side, the management of urban ecosystem for sustainable, inclusive, and climate resilient development. And of course, these two topics are framed within the climate justice paradigm. In particular, we are working in the Ecuadorian Amazon region. As Pedro already mentioned, is an important biodiversity area that is extremely important both for ecological conservation and human rights protection. And in this area that is geographically defined by the Yasuni Biosphere Reserve, it hosts different indigenous people, and among them also this non-contacted population. However, in the last decades, as you already know, this area was affected by massive online exploration and production, responsible for socio-environmental conflicts and human rights violation. Hence, our research group combines in our research the geographical information technology with participatory approaches, as we can see in this very beautiful image. By involving local communities and indigenous people to investigate the oil impacts of these territories and to empower the local population in the use of geospatial technologies. The other main research topic is connected to urban sustainability. In particular, we are working in the Italian urban areas and cities on different issues, such as urban Italian phenomenon and impacts, soil sealing, green areas, and air quality. And in the most of cases, we work also by involving citizens in our activity in a process of citizen science. The results of these research activities are shared in different scientific articles. The first one that I present to you is Extreme Citizen Science for Climate Justice, published in Environmental Research Letter Journal, where the paper reports the extreme citizen science process, which allowed to map 295 gas flaring sites for a total of 437 stacks in the Ecuadorian Amazon, creating data and cartographies which were included in the demand for a protection action that is supports from the campaign Apagan los mecheros, enciendan la vida. As you can see in this map, by adopting, we are adopting a GIS approach, but also a participatory approach. And this study was able to provide the first data set independent and ground validated on gas flaring activities in the Ecuadorian Amazon region. And the results confirm that gas flaring activities are widespread in the region, with implication for biodiversity conservation, human rights protection, and policy making. The second article that I show you today is the ones already presented by my colleague Daniele Codato. Just a very quick presentation that is published also in Environmental Research Letter, where in this research we adopt a new framework to identify the vulnerable carbon areas always in the Ecuadorian Amazon region, with the goal of eventually phasing out fossil fuel. And by using the Ecuadorian Amazon and as a paradigmatic case study, our research explores the feasibility of implementing energy transition path based on unburnable carbon areas through spatial multi-criterion decision analysis that is based on different approaches to territory management. Now we move in the urban context with this article. This is the third article of the Monnet Center of Excellence, and it focuses on urban sustainability, in particular mapping heat-related risk for climate change mitigation on the urban and peri-urban area of the city of Padua in Italy. As everyone, I think, know, the mitigation of urban heat islands is crucial for promoting the sustainable development of urban areas. And in this framework, geographic information systems, GIS, together with satellite-derived data, are very powerful tools for investigating the spatio-temporal distribution of urban heat island. And in this study, we showed a complete open source GIS methodology for investigating the impact of urban heat island. Of course, the results in this article helps to define the future nature-based solution for reducing urban heat island phenomenon and promote a sustainable development of city. But also the stakeholders and policymakers can use the results of this investigation to define climate and environmental policies. Finally, the last article that my colleague Daniele Codato already mentioned focuses on the developing of the massing open online courses. This one focuses on G-Science for Climate Justice, on the course G-Science of Climate Justice. And in this article, the theoretical background and the entire methodology for the preparation and the dissemination of the course are presented and discussed with the aim of disseminating and sharing this experience to actors interested in developing similar activities by using GeoICT for good. So now we move on this special issue that we developed during this year of Monnet Center of Excellence. In this case, the special issue is more focused on climate justice, but related to the urban context and the city. As you know from the IPCC, cities and urban areas will be strongly affected by local impacts of climate change, and therefore they are considered one of the most vulnerable areas in relation to climate risk. So the main objective of this special issue was to collect interdisciplinary studies performed at urban scale to investigate, on one hand, territorial implication related to climate change impacts and adaptation measures or policies, and on the other one, sustainable scenarios and pathways to pursue more climate resilient and inclusive urban development and management. So in this special issue that is published in Landscape and Urban Planning in this journal, we collected 9 articles. We involve about 20 authors, and all the authors, the articles developed 9 different case studies, 1 in Canada, 3 in Ecuador, 2 in Italy, 1 in China, 1 in Spain, and 1 in Denmark. As you can see from the title, we have different case studies, but also different methodologies and approaches. And of course, this special issue is available online in the journal Landscape and Urban Planning. And finally, we arrive to the last part of this presentation, the two books that we published and we are publishing. The first book is Drones and Geographical Information Technology in Agroecology and Organic Farming, is already published in CRC Press, and it's an open access book. In this book, we explore the challenges posed by new geographic information technologies, such as satellite images, GIS, and drones in agroecology and organic farming. And of course, the book discusses differences among technology-led and conventional farming system and the role of technology in strengthening the potential of agroecology. Finally, the book highlights how societies that practice agroecology through the development of human environmental co-evolutionary system represent a solid model for sustainability. And finally, the last book actually is in process, is Climate Justice in the Earth, Research Movement and Institution. The book will be published in CRC Press in 2024, and also this book will be open access. And in this case, the book explores researches and case studies that apply a climate justice approach and investigate how and why communities deal with the inequities from climate change in relation to different topics, as for example, climate justice, fossil fuel and unburnable carbon, climate justice in the cities, people and territories in Europe and the world, and also the issue of movement, gender intersectionality, and climate justice. And in this case, we want to integrate a local perspective with the example both from the global south to the global north. So thank you very much for your attention. We will share the presentation online, so you can find also the link to our researches and to our articles and books. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Francesca, to share this result. I would like to stress again, all these publications are published at open access to facilitate the distribution of the access. Now I want to give the floor to Vanessa Nakate for a contribution and reflection about climate justice in Africa and the role of climate justice movement in terms of the contribution of youth. And I want to just to stress one thing. Vanessa don't like to be called activist, but fighter for climate justice. I think this is an interesting perspective. And so the floor is yours, Vanessa. Please share your reflection on action of youth people in Africa.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be speaking here today. In 2018, I started to do research about some of the challenges that the people in my country, Uganda, were facing. And I remember getting to learn that climate change was one of those challenges. It is something that I had obviously, seen in school, read about in school, but I didn't really carry the urgency of the challenge. But when I read these impacts and how they're already affecting the lives of the people in my country, Uganda, I knew that this was a huge challenge and I had to do something about it. I remember seeing that some of these impacts, like the flooding, the droughts, they were already affecting the lives of so many people in Uganda. And something needed to be done. For me, that was my beginning understanding how urgent the climate crisis was and how it was already impacting lives and livelihoods in so many communities. In that time, the Fridays for Future strikes had been started by Greta from Sweden. And when I saw Greta striking, I felt so inspired to do the same thing to raise awareness about the impact of climate change in my country. I made a decision to start going out to the street and holding signs and placards to raise awareness and also to share what we were doing in Uganda on social media, because in a way, with social media, we could reach a bigger audience and more people, even beyond Uganda. I remember holding my very first strike with my siblings and my cousins, and actually my first strike was on a Sunday. When I made the decision to start striking for the climate, I didn't start immediately because I was worried and scared about going to the street and nervous about it. But I finally made the decision to start striking. But when I made the decision, I realized it was already a Saturday. And I had this urgency in my heart that I had to strike and raise awareness. So I decided that I would start striking on Sunday and then join the rest of the youth activists every Friday for the following weeks. And in the journey, we saw the birth of Youth for Future. Youth for Future was a group that I put together with different activists. Most of them were my friends from university. Remember at that time in 2019, the environmental movement, the way it was being reported, the climate strikes, it made some of my friends feel like, they cannot join the climate strikes since they were not in high school anymore. So I asked them if we can call ourselves Youth for Future and continue to strike with the rest of the groups in different parts of the world. So that is how Youth for Future came about in Uganda. So we started organizing strikes. They were much smaller than the strikes that we see in the countries within Europe because of some of the challenges that we've seen in organizing very big strikes. We started to reach out to schools as well and carry out climate education with the students. We knew that there was a big gap and many students didn't really understand the impact of climate change. And many of them didn't even know the role that they could play in either organizing or speaking to their parents or speaking to their teachers about climate change and about what needs to be done. So we really thought it was important to reach out to schools, to carry out climate education, to reach out to communities. One thing I remember from communities, reaching out to communities, and it's almost the same thing even up to today, is that not everyone will understand the language of 1.5, but for many people, they will understand that climate change is affecting their access to food, or it is affecting their farms, or their crops or their water sources. So that made me really understand that even as much as we talk about climate education, we have to be careful about the language that we use in different communities or when we are speaking to different people, because not everyone will know what 1.5 is, not everyone will know what the science of climate change is, but many people will understand that because of the changes in weather patterns, their farms are being affected, their families are facing strains on some of the basic necessities of life. Along the way, we started the Rise Up movement as well. And Rise Up movement was really to create a platform that would amplify the voices of different activists across Africa. With Youth for Future, we were mostly working within Uganda. And with Rise Up movement, we started to connect with different activists in different African countries. And we wanted to really raise this platform for African voices. Many times African voices are referred to as missing voices, but we are not missing voices. It's just that there are no platforms. There's few people amplifying these voices. We knew that every activist has a story to tell, and every story has a solution to give, and every solution has a life to change. So that is how Rise Up movement came about. And with Rise Up movement, we've been able to, find opportunities for activists through media to tell their stories, and also through conferences. Because for last year itself, we did have a delegation from Rise Up to go to the Stockholm Plus 50 and also to go to COP27 in Egypt. And it's really important that no one is left behind in our fight for climate justice, especially people from the communities that are least responsible for climate change. And our messages, have always been clear from the beginning until now, and mostly to tell our leaders, to tell the people to listen to the science. The IPCC has made it very clear that if we are to stay safe, if we are to stay within safe climate limits, then we cannot have any new oil and gas projects. The IEA has also been very clear about no new fossil fuels if we are to limit global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has repeatedly said that any new investments in fossil fuels would be moral and economic madness. And he said the business models of fossil fuel companies are inconsistent with human survival. And we've seen that. We've seen the impacts of the climate crisis. And we've seen how much stress and fear it has caused in so many people, unsure about the kind of future that they walk into because of our present that is already very catastrophic. Along the way, we started to understand some of the intersections of climate change as well, to understand that climate change was more than weather, and it is more than statistics, it is more than numbers, and it is about the people. In understanding the intersection of climate change, it helps us bring people at the center of the conversation. It helps us bring or put people on these numbers, on these statistics. It's very easy for people to read statistics and move on, but it's another to really understand that with every statistic, there is an individual, there is a family, there is a community. And one of the most, important intersections I've seen of climate change, have really been on poverty eradication, for example. When I started my activism, some of the people would tell me, why don't you advocate to eradicate poverty? But as I read more about climate change, because it was completely a new topic to me. I was a business student at university. So it's not like I had a lot of knowledge about environmental issues. These are things that I got to learn in my journey of activism. And one of the things I learned was we can't eradicate poverty without addressing climate change. Because as families lose their livelihoods, as families are displaced, as families are losing their farms, their businesses, their sources of income, they're being pushed into poverty traps, which poverty traps are being passed on from generation to generation. I also remember reading an article that was talking about climate brides, something that I would never think of, but it explained how for many families in Africa, when they are faced with climate disasters, when they cannot, when they've lost their source of income and they don't have the basic necessities to support their children. One, they are forced to remove their children from school, and there is always a priority on who stays in school and who leaves school. And in this article, it explained how many times it is the girl children that are dropping out of school as climate disasters escalate. It explained how families are forced to put their children, girls, into early marriages with the expectation of a bride price that can help them recover from climate impacts. So I got to understand how climate change is actually exacerbating child marriages in certain parts of the world. It is leading to school dropouts in certain parts of the world. But you cannot think of this if you're only looking at climate change in the direction of numbers and statistics, and if you haven't put the human face in this conversation. When you talk about conflict and how the depleting resources and how communities are now having to fight over the little resources that they have as water sources are drying up. We're not just seeing women having to walk long distances, but we're seeing communities having to struggle for the limited resources that they have. Talk about, achieving zero hunger. Climate change is exacerbating food insecurity in different parts of the world. From floods destroying people's farms to droughts drying crops. Last year, I was able to visit Turkana region. It's one of the regions that is being impacted by the drought in the Horn of Africa. The worst drought that it has seen in 40 years. A drought that has left so many women and so many children struggling to find something to eat, because most of the people I interacted with in that visit were mothers and children. Many of them explained how the fathers had moved with the animals to try and get pasture and find water for the animals. So many women were left alone with their children who were sick, and they were trying to keep their children alive. I remember visiting a hospital where the worst cases of severe acute malnutrition are referred and treated. And there are so many children receiving treatment. But one child that I remember meeting, he was with his grandmother. He was in a situation that the doctors referred to as a wasted situation. And it was very unlikely that he would survive. He was receiving treatment, but there was really no hope that he could survive. And by the time the sun set that evening, he had passed away. It just made me see how climate change is not just a future threat, it is happening right now. It isn't just robbing people of their future, it is robbing them of their present. It is robbing them of their survival. And that's why we need to do something. We need to understand these intersections. We need to understand climate change beyond the numbers on our screens, beyond the statistics, but to really put a human face on the conversation. But with what I've seen, with the youth movement, the mobilizing and the organizing of millions of young people, it has really, really given me hope to keep fighting, to know that another world is not only necessary for all of us, but it's actually possible. I have seen, different youth activists running projects in their communities, transforming their communities, even with the little resources that they have, bringing change one step at a time, but while also holding leaders accountable and pushing them for more systematic change. I did start a project that involves the installation of solar panels and clean cooking stoves in schools in Uganda. And this was to help schools reduce their consumption of firewood. This was to help schools have basic access to electricity. And when this project started, we didn't know how many schools we could reach, but we just hoped we would reach as many schools as possible. And so far, we've reached 51 schools in Uganda, impacting the lives of about 19,000 children, and hoping to scale up the project in the DRC and reach more children as well, with these installations. So it is these, actions of different young people across the world that really give me hope in this fight. But we cannot do this alone. We need everyone involved. We need everyone involved. The planet doesn't just belong to young people. It doesn't just belong to youth activists. It belongs to you. It belongs to me. It belongs to all of us. And if it belongs to all of us, that means it's our home, and that means it's a responsibility for all of us. And that means that we should work and hold our leaders accountable. We should push for no new fossil fuel investment and push for scaling up of renewables, because that is the balance. No new fossil fuels and yes to renewables, while addressing the energy, the energy poverty in many countries in the global south, addressing issues of climate finance, mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. We saw the establishment of a loss and damage fund at COP27 in Egypt, but this is still an empty fund that needs money that can reach people that are suffering some of the worst impacts of climate change. And as I finish, I would like to share about a book that I wrote, A Bigger Picture. And this book talks about, of course, my experience as an activist, and how it's just amazing, because I think the very first time I got to learn about the word activist was when I joined the climate movement. I don't think it had ever crossed my vocabulary. I don't think the word activism had ever crossed my vocabulary. But with a bigger picture, I tell my story, and not just my story, but the story of how Youth for Future was formed, Rise Up movement, and how we've worked with different activists in Uganda and different activists across Africa and across the world to really push and fight for a better world for all of us. But one of the beautiful things about A Bigger Picture is that it tells other stories as well. Every activist has a story to tell. And with whatever platform that we get, we must give the opportunity, we must pass the mic, we must pass the platform to other people to tell their stories as well. For me, that is what will ensure that we leave no one behind. That is what will ensure that we leave no community behind. That is what will ensure, that the world that we are all fighting for is not only necessary, but it's actually possible, it is achievable and attainable. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Long live the Rise Up movement.
Thanks, Vanessa, for your contribution. And now we move to the next contribution. We give the floor to Stina Elizabeth Oseland, Director of a Climate Agency of Bergen Municipality. She tells us about climate justice in the city and the experience of Bergen Municipality. Stina was one of the first director of a special agency of a municipality for climate justice. I think this is very important element as a good practice to share. Please, Stina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I just have to check, can you see my presentation? I am not very used to Zoom, so I just have to check this. It looks like you can see my screen, right? My presentation.
Yes.
Someone's nodding. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for inviting me to talk a bit about Bergen. And I think it's quite interesting coming after the very interesting talk by Vanessa just recently, moving from Africa to the northern hemisphere, to the northern tip of Europe even. Welcome to Bergen. Just a little glance, I'm not, as people come from different places, Bergen is the second largest city of Norway. It is the regional capital of Western Norway, founded in 1070. We have a population of about 287,000 people divided into 8 districts. The main industry in the region is energy, maritime, tourism, and creative industries. Bergen is the largest harbor of Norway, and it's a major research and innovation hub. We have a lot of different research environments, amongst them on climate change. The Bjerknes Center is located in Bergen, for example. This picture is also from Bergen, from one of the mountains. Bergen is said to be a city between 7 mountains, and those mountains affect how we are affected by climate change. A very strong goal for Bergen is to develop the city into a livable and walkable city with access to nature for all inhabitants, and it is to be a fair city. This picture is not a computer-made illustration. This is from a part of downtown Bergen where a small beach has been made. You can see the mountain, in one of the 7 mountains in the background. And this idea of building an attractive, sustainable and fair city is quite strong in Bergen. And as you can see here, probably, I have a background in research. I've done a lot of teaching also on how climate change affects cities and how cities work on dealing with climate change. And I think this model here of what urbanization is and how it is a dynamic process is quite illustrative. It's the process between economic life, political life, ecological life, and social life, and how they interact. And then bringing in the sayings of Harriet Bulkley, who says that climate impacts do not just happen to the city, but are fundamentally shaped through it. They are integral to the processes that create urban spaces. And hence, when we talk about climate change in the city and how it is shaped both through the city and also how the specifics of that place will say something about how the place is affected by climate change, we need to understand that within these dynamic interactions, that is the urban. Harriet Bulkley also says that understanding the impact of climate change is to understand how it will add to or relieve existing vulnerabilities. Meaning we need to find the existing vulnerabilities within these dynamics and then lay on top climate change. How will we be affected? In Bergen, for example, a lot of mountains, and one of the main physical developments when it comes to climate change in Bergen is that we will have a lot more rain. We are already the wettest city in Europe. We have 250 days of rain a year, and we will have an increase of approximately 30% in this century, meaning that we need to handle a lot of rain. We already handle a lot of rain, a lot of water, but we will have to handle more, meaning landslides, mudslides, sea level rises, and other kinds of floodings. And this understanding of climate change as something that affects and is affected by the city, shaped by the city, was quite strong when we were developing a new climate strategy for Bergen, a new climate and energy action plan for the city. It was passed in January this year after a long series, a lot of work. And in this slide, we have managed to squeeze the entire plan into one slide. It is a plan of 87 pages, something like that. We say that the main goal for 2030 is for Bergen to be a low emission society. For 2050 to be a 1.5 degree society, meaning a society in line with the Paris Agreement, hence including indirect emissions. This is a city in Norway, in the northern part of Europe. We have quite a large indirect emissions, that is emissions happening elsewhere caused by our consumption. we say that the vision of this climate strategy is that the city of Bergen is to be a driving force for an ambitious, radical, and fair climate transformation that will allow everyone in Bergen to live good lives with low emissions in a changing climate. We have 4 main strategies, or you could call it goals. The first is to cut direct emissions. The second is to create a circular economy. The third is to preserve nature because of nature's ability to hold and store carbon, and also to deal with the physical consequences of climate change. And the third is to prepare for change, that we in Bergen, that we prepare to deal with the effects of a changing climate, but also to make use of the opportunities in the transition to a low emission society. And then we can see that all of these strategies have a symbol close next to them. We also have 6 themes with 2 priority areas within each theme. And next to the title of each of these strategies or priority areas, you could see the reuse of those symbols, meaning which of the goals do this strategy apply to or contribute to achieving the goals. And the first priority area is a just transformation. And I'm going to zoom a bit more in on that. But as we can see, we have this idea that climate change must be handled as the all-encompassing problem that it is. It infiltrates all aspects of the urban, and hence we must find solutions in different angles here. I did bring along IPCC's definition of climate justice, because that has been important to us when we have developed this plan. And the IPCC divides the understanding of climate justice in 3 spheres. It's distributional, that is the burden and benefits among individuals, nations, and generations. It's procedural, who decides and participates in decision making. And its recognition, the respect, engagement, and fair consideration of diverse cultures and perspectives. And all 3 elements are important when it comes to climate justice and the development of a more climate-friendly and just society. We have looked a bit at how other cities deal with the transformation and elements of fair or just transformation. We find a series of efforts that deals with process. They are a lot about co-production of solutions. In Barcelona, there has been a process of reaching out to vulnerable groups through collaboration with civil society and local businesses. In Paris, they have participatory budgeting with a climate profile. Sydney has developed new methods to involve marginalized groups. And then we also have the element of outcomes. In Barcelona, they have developed climate shelters focusing on vulnerable groups. In Los Angeles, there is an electric car sharing scheme in low-income neighborhoods. Cape Town has been working on refurbishing and isolating private homes in low-income areas, and so on. So you can look at climate justice in an urban scenery as both process and as outcomes. In our plan, as I said, we have 12 strategies or prioritized areas, and the first one is of just transformation. And we further develop this in the plan, of course, and we say that for this strategy, we will transform Bergen into a fair, low-emission society. Implemented climate measures should improve public health and not increase social and economic inequalities. And we define certain elements that are particularly important to develop within, especially within the first phase of implementing the strategy, to actually move forward. So this is one of the attempts to further operationalize what does just transformation mean in an urban context. And we see that there is the need a need for knowledge about the connection between climate change and physical and psychological health. There is a need for preventive measures to reduce public health risks. There is a need to design climate measures so that they do not increase social and economic inequalities. And it is particularly important to involve children and youth in the climate transformation, the generational aspect of climate justice. And how have we done this? How far have we gotten along? There, a lot of cities, a lot of places, a lot of national authorities as well talk about climate justice and talk about a transformation that needs to be fair and just. Our goal in Bergen is to operationalize it so that it actually becomes more than words. And we are working on it both along the lines of process and of outcomes. When it comes to process, we did a lot of work to have a broad participation in the process of making the new climate strategy. We invited a broad set of actors to the reference group. We had participation processes directed towards youth. We had a collaboration with a human rights center in Bergen on the involvement of youths. We also did a lot of participation with the general public in what we called climate dialogues, allowing people to have discussions in their own homes or at the library or wherever they felt comfortable without the presence of anyone from the municipality, but with the basis of questions and material provided by the municipality, so that they could discuss how different aspects of a transformation would affect them or what they would find particularly important. And this was sent to the municipality as input to the strategy. Outcomes, at the moment, we are finalizing a subsidy for heat pumps. The city council decided to spend quite a few millions Norwegian kroners on subsidies for heat pumps, and the scheme was to have a social element, meaning that if the household has an income lower than a set sum, they could apply for a larger amount of subsidy for purchasing and installing a heat pump in their house than if the household had a higher level of income. And it was also decided that the group of people with the lower income, their application was to be dealt with first. So we are handing out quite a lot of subsidies now for heat pumps. I think we're close to 3,000 households having subsidies to buy heat pumps. Not the full sum, of course, but for quite a lot of them, it will be quite substantial. We are also working hard to develop methods and systems for process and assessment to ensure just transformation. I'm going to show you a little bit about how we think about it, because we say that a just transformation in the city needs to deal with both the process, as mentioned, it needs to be inclusive. The outcomes needs to have an element of equity, and also we need to deal with elements of assessment. When it comes to what is often brought up when talking about climate measures and equitable outcomes or equitable solutions in the face of climate being an emergency, defined as an emergency, there is a debate on, but shouldn't we use the money where most emissions can be cut, the most efficient way of cutting emissions? And that can contribute to enhancing inequality. But as a previous speaker talked about, we cannot eradicate poverty without dealing with climate change. And in the same way, I would argue we need to look at both aspects at the same time. It could be difficult and probably maybe impossible if we're going to develop a climate policy and a climate politics which also aims at shrinking the inequalities. It might not be possible in all stages, but to have the goal of not increasing inequality and finding ways of dealing with that aspect, I think is quite imperative. And I would like to close off with this idea and notion and acknowledgement that the most unjust action is no action. If we don't do anything to deal with climate change, that is the most unjust. We are not leaving, we're not doing what we can so that the future generations can lead good lives. This picture is from the first truly big landslide in Bergen in New York Times in 2005. There were actually deaths caused by it, and it woke up the Bergen society to the importance of adaptation. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention and for inviting me.
Many thanks, Tina, for this real concrete and visionary action, because it is a very interesting combination between principle and the practice of justice in the framework of climate justice. And again, I think a confirmation of the role and importance of a local administration in this change. There is many theories about the role of a local administration, from more capitalistic to libertarian municipalism, and we understand the importance of local authorities and local governance in the combination between institution and citizen in framing the change. Many thanks for sharing this inspiring and the practice action. Many thanks. So we move now to the contribution of Joshi Shangri-La. She's an academic member of the Faculty of Climate Justice in the Evergreen State College of Olympia, Washington. She speak about decolonizing the resource commons in a multiscalar political ecologies framework. Thank you, Yoshi, to share your contribution. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful invitation to the 5th International Conference on Climate Justice. I'm very pleased to be here. I was able to listen to some part of the last presentation, which I was very happy to notice that there is some continuity. There's going to be some continuity between the last presentation and mine. So I was invited to share some insights based on a book I recently published called Climate Change, Justice, and Global Resource Commons. And in the little time that we have, I believe I have 20 minutes, I will try to present a brief overview of some of the key arguments from that book. And I then would like to share some thoughts on where I'm headed next for my forthcoming research project. And I'm going to try to capture the notion of decolonizing the resource commons in this particular context, in the context of transformative justice. I thought that a good way in which to capture the gist of the main argument or thesis of my book is to present it in the form of this graphic. When I started doing research on climate change, particularly with a focus on climate justice, as a graduate student in 2007, around that time, I completed my dissertation in 2011. So the subject of my analysis at the time was North-South climate justice dimensions, focus on the international negotiations over the Kyoto Protocol. There were some intense discussions on the Kyoto Protocol, whether to extend it, whether to replace it. And as we all know that the Kyoto Protocol has been replaced with the Paris Agreement. So in these sort of discussions, what I came to realize is that these international negotiations are a way in which the international community is struggling to come up with the rules through which the global community should interact to address this problem of climate change. So in that sense, we are treating the atmosphere as a global commons. And as we know from Elinor Ostrom's work, there are many ways in which at local scale, resource commons can be governed successfully and sustainably through collective action at the grounded scale. And unfortunately, at the global scale, it has not been as easy to treat the atmospheric resource as a commons because of the experience with the Kyoto Protocol. We have not been able to come up with a fair, ambitious, and binding treaty. The Paris Agreement is not binding and it's not as ambitious, and the equity and fairness provisions are quite lacking because the Kyoto Protocol was based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities that acknowledged the differential contributions of so-called developed and so-called developing country parties because of the legacy of colonialism. But we were not able to come up with an equitable framework to move forward. So what that means is that it has been difficult or challenging to manage the atmosphere as a commons. So it can seem demoralizing to know that we are at this current state of affairs. And in my book, my argument was that if that has been challenging to manage the atmosphere as a commons, we can still take action. And we can still take action within the context of climate justice imperatives. And I propose and I suggest that we do that by supporting numerous efforts around the world at various local, national scales to take back various localized resource commons. And one of the ways in which that has been done is in the country of Nepal that I come from. In Nepal, there is a very successful example of community forestry, which is a way in which local forest users have successfully taken back the forest commons from the nation state and from the wealthy political and economic elite historically. And so this kind of model could be emulated for a wide range of other spheres of life that are connected to the climate system, whether we think about food-based resource and land commons, whether we think about disaster response and preparedness, whether we think about the technologies that we will need to move towards a more successful climate mitigation. And whether we think about some of the most important climate action we need today, which is to keep fossil fuels in the ground. I argue that the ability of localized communities to keep fossil fuels in the ground can be thought of also as an enclosure of the commons. Most communities, as we know, do not have the ability to exercise that level of self-determination, but that should be our effort to support communities to be able to exercise self-determination. So there are other examples in which localized resources are managed as a commons. Another example comes from the example of Hiti, which is a traditional ancient mechanism through which water is provided to local communities. So then what I propose here then is that one of the ways in which we can conceptualize decolonizing the commons is to insist on these kinds of transformations. When we think about transformative justice, the attention seems to be focused on structures, economic structures such as capitalism, and to transform capitalism towards a more socialist world is a very honorable goal, but can be a daunting one to pursue. In the climate justice and environmental justice literature, there has been a lot of arguments for how we need to focus not only on distributive and participatory justice measures, but on structural change. And structural change is usually conceptualized in the sense of changing the structure of capitalism. But my argument is that we should also be able to conceptualize transformative structural change in the context of supporting local communities' pursuit of self-determination, self-governance, and autonomy in the pursuit of their sustainable livelihoods. So this is essential in order to enhance the capabilities of disenfranchised groups and to undo the damage done particularly to indigenous groups by colonization of their resources and territories. If colonialism enclosed the commons and neocolonialism or neoliberalism threatens to privatize it, then decolonization should mean returning the commons to their rightful users. And this works not only in the global or international context, but within various subnational and national contexts as well. So then an argument I am making here is that climate justice can be operationalized by supporting various moves to reclaim various commons. I briefly spoke about the example of community forestry. One of the research projects I engaged in that is also talked about in my book is to think about the impact of carbon trading measures that seek to commodify the atmosphere through carbon offsets and such. I wanted to look at the impact of, you might have heard about REDD+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. That is a carbon offset or carbon trading solution that tries to commodify carbon credits. So I wanted to look at the ways in which the REDD+ might affect the successful example of community forestry in Nepal. And what I did see was somewhat troubling. Community forestry in Nepal was achieved after great struggle and effort. It was not an easy victory. And it does seem concerning that with the introduction of REDD+ or carbon commodification, it might bleed over to possibly weakening the gains of community forestry. And like I was saying earlier, there are many different ecological social systems that are connected to the atmospheric system. The struggles with commoning versus commodification of forests, water, food, and other resources are ongoing. But once again, the effort should be on seeking to keep our resources within the realm of the commons, to preserve the integrity of the commons, and to seek to withstand the pressures to commodify. And there are many examples of thriving or successful commons around the world which can be supported. And based on these examples, we can also be inspired to engage in more commoning processes. One of the things that I wanted to mention here was that in the part of the world where I come from, indigenous communities strive to retain their sovereignty and self-determination over the forest, land, and water commons. Therefore, a rallying cry of indigenous activists in Nepal and India is Jal, jungle, and Zameen. That stands for water, forest, and land, the source of livelihood and lives for many around the world, particularly for indigenous communities. So then my argument here is that transformative justice should be conceptualized as a way of commoning or reclaiming the commons or taking back the commons to support the autonomy and self-determination of communities around the world. But I want to extend that further by saying that taking back the commons is not enough. It is a wonderful start, but it's also important to think about epistemology. Epistemology has to do with the ways in which we produce knowledge and the ways in which we validate or invalidate various knowledge practices. And as the last speaker spoke, I noticed there was a mention of epistemic justice. So this is what I am also arguing, that transformative justice should include not just commoning practices, but also measures to support genuine epistemic justice. And this is a way, a critical and crucial way through which we can decolonize our practices around climate change. What I'm saying here is that it is important to govern the commons from the local scale, but also how communities get to govern matters as well. So whether communities are able to exercise their traditional practices that give them continuity with their ways of living and ways of being and ways of knowing. An argument that I'm seeking to make in my current and future work is to show how these three are inherently connected. Ways of knowing having to do with epistemology, ways of being having to do with traditional cultures and worldviews, and ways of living that has to do with traditional practices and rituals. And here I think it's also important to recognize that many of those who we deem to be climate vulnerable in the climate justice and environmental justice community, marginalized communities, vulnerable communities are oftentimes looked at as victims to be rescued. There's a saviorism element involved in these approaches. And I argue that one way in which we can decolonize these efforts is to think about the capabilities of traditional communities and what is and what exists in the ancient practices and knowledge systems that are increasingly becoming erased and weakened and threatened by modernization processes around the world. So to try to help traditional communities retain their practices and to be able to utilize their traditional ways of being and knowing and governing seem to be critical measures in supporting their resilience and their ability to adapt to climate change. And in some cases, as I mentioned, with the keeping it in the ground, these efforts can also help with climate mitigation as well. So there in the environmental studies field of study that I usually work within, there is a lot of interest in interdisciplinarity that we have to draw on various disciplines and engage in integration among the disciplines in order to address the pressing issues of our time, such as climate change. I have been thinking about this for quite a while, that it's important to not only focus on interdisciplinarity within Western conventions of knowledge production, but also to be open to what I call inter-epistemic engagement in climate change. So not only thinking about climate change within systems of Western science, climate science, which I'm not saying is not important. It's incredibly important to recognize the validity of climate science, knowing how climate denialist forces are at play. But it's also important to create space for non-Western ways in which many traditional peoples around the world have historically and continue to make sense of climate change. So to try to understand other ways of knowing about climate change is important as well. And I asked the question, is there epistemological equity in the work of integrating traditional knowledge and Western Eurocentric climate science? And I think we all know the answer to that question. The IPCC produces reports every couple of years, and there is typically a token mention of indigenous knowledge. But what we want to do is to move towards more meaningful ways in which to incorporate traditional knowledge in climate discourse, and to seek to validate indigenous ecological knowledge and climate epistemologies, not through the lens of Eurocentric science, but on its own terms, so that traditional knowledge and the insights that come from that in the sphere of climate change can be used as a decision-making tool without waiting for scientific validation. In the field of environmental studies that I work with, there is increasingly tremendous interest in incorporating Western science and traditional ecological knowledge. And while it is a very desirable and honorable goal, it is not as easy as it seems. Because of various reasons. Foucault has talked about the power knowledge, power dynamics, and this does seem to be present in these efforts to integrate Western science and indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. Paul Naban talks about cultural parallax, which is a fundamental inability of people from various vantage points to see one another's points of view. And incommensurability has to do with the ways in which there is a translation challenge between different points of view or worldviews. And this might be possible in the context of or efforts to integrate traditional knowledge and Western science. So I'm arguing that epistemic justice entails considering the legitimacy of traditional knowledge systems for decision-making without waiting for scientific validation. Spivak talked about the question of how the subaltern speaks, but whether people in positions of power are able to hear them or not is a different and more challenging question. So we need, in the context of indigenous knowledge, those of us who are in systems of hegemonic knowledge production spaces, such as our universities, we need to make a particular effort to try to validate, legitimize, and try to truly, genuinely understand the practices of various communities that are grappling with climate change in their own ways. Geographer Emily Yeh also, who did some work in interdisciplinary sort of communities in the context of climate change, made these kinds of observations that the efforts to bring them together are wrought by these power dynamics. And among other things, she has argued that it is important to recognize the embodied practice of traditional indigenous peoples as knowledge, and to validate these experiences as knowledge and to use them to understand climate change better. I would go one step further than the argument that we need to validate the experience of indigenous people. And I would argue that many indigenous people, including the one that I belong to, the Newa, as well as many others around the world, have their own knowledge practices. So beyond collecting their experiences and their observations, I think that we can also be studying, even if it's not easy to do within our disciplinary constraints. I think that making an effort to try to make sense of traditional ways of being, knowing, and making connections to traditional ways of governing is quite critical. In this realm, Linda Tui Wise Smith, who has published Decolonizing Methodologies, has done tremendous work in showing that there are indigenous practices that, when you study them closely, have tremendous sophistication and ways of making sense of the place of humans in the cosmos. And these are things that interest me quite a bit. So in my own future research work, as I suggested earlier, my future work is going to be focused on examining indigenous climate epistemologies. And I came up with a framework, I think, that is useful in doing this work. So this framework consists of 3 pieces. One has to do with examining closely the mythologies, the origin stories, prophecies, and other pieces of traditional cultures. And I'm seeking to and proposing to do that. I've started to do this for the Newa culture that is indigenous to the Kathmandu Valley in current-day Nepal. And there are many different stories and epics and practices that I think can be encapsulated as indigenous ways of knowing. There are also a number of cultural practices related to floods, droughts, and disasters that I argue are very relevant to thinking about climate change and how ancient people historically dealt with these weather-related anomalies. I will very briefly, if there's time, speak about the Machindranath Jatra in this context. So then, also importantly, these indigenous ways of knowing and being are, I argue, connected with indigenous ways of governing, like the Guti institution shows in the context of Kathmandu. So Guti is an indigenous resource management, resource governance institution, but it is more than just an institution. It's also integral to the identity of the Newa people, and it is under threat today. So in the settler colonial context, the nation state of Nepal, when the Nepal was created, the tradition and the institution of Guti has been compromised by the Nepali nation state. But Guti continues to exist in various more compromised forms. And one of the realms in which it continues to exist is in the management of these traditional water infrastructure that I mentioned earlier. They're called hittis, and they provide water within the realm of the commons, in the sense that you don't have to purchase it, and the infrastructure is increasingly compromised by modern development, such as roads and other infrastructure, city infrastructure. But there is an effort to preserve Hitti as part of heritage preservation in Nepal. I find that in these sorts of instances, indigenous knowledge and governance is threatening to the nation state, but cultural practices being preserved are not as threatening. So in this way, in a compromised way, the practice of Guti has continued, and there are many other instances in which it continues, but for now, I think this is just one example. So through the sphere of culture, there continues to be the practice of Guti as a resource governance mechanism, which can, I think, be scaled up to be more effectively used as an indigenous governance sort of practice. So one of the other ways in which the Guti comes into play is in sustaining.
We should arrive to the conclusion because we are over the 20 minutes.
Okay, so then, so the Machinana Jatra is one of the traditions that are connected to praying for rain in a context of drought. And there are other traditions such as the Swasthani Brat Katha, which I think is very interesting because it is a older than 16th century practice that speaks to the possibility of sea levels rising and engulfing humanity if fossil fuels are dug from the ground. So in that early era, the idea that these ancient practices already had prophetic warnings about climate change is very interesting and important to study and understand. So in conclusion, I would say that climate justice should be thought about in ways that go beyond simply distributive justice or participatory justice that has been the focus of much discourse. And we really need to think about recognizing not just vulnerability and victimhood, but the capabilities and leadership of indigenous communities and various ancient traditional communities in helping us guide the way towards just climate action. And along these lines, recognizing the epistemologies of indigenous communities and supporting their ways of governance would contribute to moving in the direction of transformative justice, transformative climate justice. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shangri-La, because this contribution is very interesting and very important to think justice in a very systemic way of recognition, and this focus on epistemic, I think, is very important. Many thanks. Now I give the floor to Omar Mohamed Elmawi about the campaign to stop EACOP, especially to understand how this movement is rising, is organizing to refuse this fossil future. EACOP is a very big and destructive infrastructure, crossing and cutting Africa social and natural ecosystems. I think this is very important, this contribution. Please, Omar, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Massimo. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're listening to us today. My name is Omar Elmawi, as it has been stated. I used to work for the Stop East African Crude Oil Pipeline campaign until November last year. And it's a pleasure to be speaking to all of you about this destructive project and what it's about. I apologize, I don't have beautiful slides to share with you, so you'll have to do with my voice and the video. I hope that should be enough. All right, to kick us off with this discussion, I think it's important for us to understand why the East African Crude Oil Pipeline is a pressing issue that has really garnered significant attention in the recent years. And the construction of this pipeline which is an infrastructure project that has sparked a wave of concern over its social, health, economic, and environmental impact. And also, it's essential that we raise awareness about the plight of the affected communities and the urgent need for action. So what's important for all of you to understand is that this is going to be the world's longest heated pipeline if it's going to be constructed. It's going to be stretching over 1,445 kilometers from the western part of Uganda, going all the way to the coastal region in Tanzania. For those who want to equate it to some of the countries that you understand, the equivalent of distance is around the distance between Paris and Rome. That is how big this pipeline is. And the pipeline itself has been sold as really the game changer that will sort of boost Uganda and Tanzania's economic growth and propel it into the developed nation. That if they tap into these oil resources they have in their country, that then they're going to be the next developed countries and they're going to be calling the shots. Maybe they'll find themselves into the G20 and the G7s in the next few years. But after looking deeply into the issues, we've realized that the impact that this project is going to have are actually significant, and that it's going to affect even more the local communities and the fragile ecosystems. Now, to begin with, it's important for colleagues here to understand that there are many social injustices that this project is going to be imposing on the affected communities. Among them is during the construction itself, it has already, it's not something that's going to be happening. Even before the construction has started, it has already displaced and forced the displacement of many people. It has caused land grabbing as a big issue. It has disrupted livelihoods because most of the communities living across the corridor are farmers and people who depend on agriculture and livestock keeping. And also it's affecting indigenous peoples and local communities. These communities rely heavily on agriculture and fishing as their primary means of sustenance, and they are now facing an even uncertain future as their lands are taken away from them in the pursuit of profit and economic growth. And the human rights atrocities that are also being reported each working day are really becoming significant because there are too many for us to count, and the companies behind the project have time and again really put corporate greed and corporate interest, before people's interests and needs. It's also important to note that the ECOP also poses significant environmental risks, and they really cannot be ignored. One is that the pipeline traverses through protected areas, including the Murchison Falls Park, which is the second most visited park in Uganda, and therefore a huge tourist attraction site, and therefore it invites and brings a lot of foreign exchange and foreign currency within the country. It's also a home to a vast array of wildlife, including, the big five that we talk about, the elephants, the lions, the giraffes, among others. And the construction and operation of the pipeline really threaten to disturb these delicate ecosystems that will lead to habitat destruction and biodiversity loss. Even more, I think, worrying is that the transportation of the crude oil that we're speaking about here, there are threats that there might be risks of oil spill. And this is a concern because more than a third of the pipeline is located within a region that is considered to be within the Lake Victoria Basin. For colleagues that are joining us here, the Lake Victoria itself is an important freshwater source that serves over 50 million people in the East African community. And therefore, any impact that's happening within that basin can be significant in terms of people having access to clean water, leave alone the fishermen and other people that depend on the lake for their livelihood and a way to make their daily living. I think it's important for us to also recognize the severity of this social impact and environmental impact. And I would like to really mention, I think you heard when we began, Vanessa Nakate, the founder of the Rise Up movement, spoke to you. We also have the Fridays for Future Uganda. And these are among the two organizations under the umbrella of the Stop East African Crude Oil Pipeline that have really taken the mantle and really became the frontliners in terms of pushing the narrative and the argument against the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. These movements have been instrumental in terms of mobilizing the youth, the communities to demand for climate justice, but also to halt fossil fuel projects such as the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. I think the campaign in terms of the East African Crude Oil Pipeline has really grown in terms of how big and how effective it has been, with tentacles now in different other parts of the globe. If you talk about Africa, there's hardly no African country that's not involved within the East African the campaign to stop the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. If you talk about Europe, countries in France, we have so many friends that are supporting the campaign. We have colleagues in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Italy, and different other countries. If you talk about Asia, we also have friends in Japan and other countries. If you talk about the Americas as well, and what this campaign has really shown is that communities are no longer looking at fights and struggles as silos or as things that are affecting individual countries. Increasingly now, we're seeing more and more communities looking at the globe as a small village. They're looking at climate impacts as impacts that don't have borders, and therefore they are coming into these issues as one. And that's why you will see the campaign is really, really echoing in the different parts of the globe within all these different countries that I'm speaking about. And it really proves the maxim that, a people united can really not be defeated. How they've been able to do this has been significantly different ways. We've been doing a lot of peaceful protests in terms of both within Africa and abroad. We've been targeting some of the companies behind the pipeline. We've been targeting shareholders and banks that are considering to give finances for the pipeline. We've targeted insurance companies that are considering to underwrite this project. And this has really, brought a lot of benefits and fruits for the campaign. Right now, we're talking about 27 banks that have committed publicly that they will not be providing financing for the project. We're talking about over 22 insurance companies globally known in terms of financing fossil fuel projects that have publicly denounced the East African Crude Oil Pipeline and say that they will not be giving an insurance cover of the same. And we are also seeing a lot of online campaigns. We are seeing a lot of other shareholders that are really confirming that they won't be involved. And therefore, these movements aim in terms of to expose the injustice of sacrificing the health and well-being of communities and the environment for short-term economic gain has really been out and about, and everyone has really heard about it. In terms of the climate movement that have not, not necessarily just relied on grassroots activism, this is one of those examples that you see, because we've also taken different other tactics, including legal actions that have been undertaken to try and challenge and stop the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, with suits having been filed within the East African Court of Justice in courts in Paris and other parts of the globe to try and really push against this project. Because what's happening is that this project is going to be to violate, both the national and international laws that are concerning human rights and environmental protection if it's going to see the light of day. These legal actions, do not only provide the means for us to seek justice for impacted communities, but what they also do is also serve as a powerful tool in terms of exposing the flawed logic behind the project's economic and development and sustainability. I think the current context in terms of the global transition towards renewable energy has also been something that the campaign has really pushed forward with, because what we're saying is, while we are confessing and agreeing that we have a continent in Africa with over 600 million people that are energy poor, but the solution is not fossil fuel projects, especially fossil fuel projects that are only done for export. We are only doing them so that we can feed in the energy crisis that is happening in Europe and other parts of the world. And that's why they are pushing against this project and saying that we have more than ample opportunities for us to tap into the renewable energy potential in Africa, because currently, I think only 1% or less than 1% of the investments on renewable energy are coming to Africa, when actually Africa is one of the leading regions in terms of potential for renewable energy. It is therefore disheartening to witness, significant investments and resources that are being allocated or that are coming to Africa are only on fossil fuel infrastructure, when what we need is an urgent need to transition to a sustainable and low carbon future. To finalize, I would like to mention that the campaign to stop the East African crude oil pipeline, really, if anything, it should serve as a testament in terms of the power of grassroots movement and legal action in challenging the social and environmental injustices posed by fossil fuel projects. I think it's important for all of us listening to really join hands and stand together in solidarity with impacted communities and support the efforts of climate movement, such as what we've heard from the Fridays for Future Uganda, the Rise Up Movement Africa, under the umbrella to try and stop the East African crude oil pipeline, because by doing so, we can really send a resounding message that the exploitation of communities and the environment for short-term one-sided economic gains is really unacceptable. It is time to refuse fossil fuel future and work towards a just and sustainable world. I would like to say that stopping ECOP is for the people, it is definitely for nature, and it is for the climate. It is not just a fight for Uganda and Tanzania, it is a fight for all of us. I'll stop there because of time, but really looking forward to engaging further.
Thanks, Omar, for this message, especially to understand how every fight in a special place is not a local problem, it is a global problem. As geographer, we think everything is multiscalar, have different meaning at different scale, but firstly, it means it is an issue of climate justice to avoid the big impact from people in the place in which the pipe is planned. And more in general, it is a general impact for everybody in this planet Earth. Thanks for your contribution. Now we move to the next contribution of Jerry McGovern about the role of ECT in climate change and a reflection on worldwide waste. I think it is other reflection. Sometimes we don't think ECT can have impact. I think this is a good contribution. Thanks, Jerry. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hopefully my screen is sharing, and thanks to Omar for the last speech, a brilliant speech, and many other brilliant speakers as well. Okay, digital is physical. And in fact, digital isn't simply physical, it's toxic. In a typical dump, digital technologies represent somewhere in the region of 70% of the toxicity. Every year we are producing about 50 million tons of digital waste, e-waste, and it's doubling every 10 to 15 years. So 50 million tons is enough to build a Mount Everest, and in 2035 we will be able to build 2 Mount Everests a year. Much of this waste is sent from the global north to the global south, to poorer countries, where it is dumped or burned the cables. This is the burning of cables to get some copper back. In fact, the recycling of digital technologies is extraordinarily bad. Less than 20% of digital technologies are recycled on an annual basis. And even what is recycled, we only get back about 30% of reusable materials because of the material complexity in digital design, which means that from a circular economy point of view, we are at about 5% for digital technologies. So the impact that this has on people, particularly in the global south, there's estimated somewhere in the region of 18 million children and 13 million women working in the informal e-waste industry, recycling in a very poor conditions with little or no protection in the process. And this does incredible damage to their health, does incredible damage to the water, to the soil, and to the air. And this problem is going to get much, much bigger over the coming years. So digital is wonderful at marketing. We talk about the cloud, but the cloud is very much on the ground. The cloud is currently about 70 million servers storing about 10 zettabytes of data, and it takes about 1 to 2 ton of CO2, or it causes 1 to 2 ton of CO2 to manufacture each one of these servers. We're actually destroying about 20 million of these servers every year, literally shredding them and destroying them for security and optimization reasons. So the digital industry is an extraordinarily wasteful, toxic, high energy intense, high material intense industry, but it does a wonderful job of hiding that. What drives it is data growth. We have a lot of crises, but we're going to hit a data crisis probably by about somewhere in the region of 25 to 2030. In 2010, we were producing about 2 zettabytes of data a year. So what is a zettabyte? Well, I calculated that to print out 1 zettabyte of data, we would need the paper from 20 trillion trees. So there are only 3.5 trillion trees on the planet, so it's not feasible. That's just 1 zettabyte of data would require the paper from 20 trillion trees. By 2020, about 64 zettabyte, 25, 180, 2030, 612 zettabyte. And estimated this is because of Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, etc., in the process. We are on the cusp of an explosion in data. The amount of servers you need to store that for 2035 would be about 1.6 billion servers. So it would be 1 server for every 4 people on the planet at that stage. We are going to hit a crisis of data, as I said, probably by about 2030. So it's a 28% annual growth rate. And what is even more shocking is that 90% of this data is crap. 90 to 95% of data is not accessed 3 months after it's first stored. So data centers are not really data centers, they're data dumps. We are extraordinarily good at producing crap in every sphere of our work, and particularly when it comes to data. Everyone's talking now about artificial intelligence. Isn't artificial intelligence great? But artificial intelligence is extraordinarily energy intense and massively waste productive because of the processing power that's actually required. We see the incredible growth in the amount of energy required to train these models, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. The usage of these models is where most of the impact will occur. ChatGPT may have consumed as much as electricity as 175,000 people in January 2023, and it's only beginning to get going. They're afraid to properly release the robust AI systems because they are so extraordinarily energy intense. Half liter of water, 20 to 50 queries. A typical data center can consume 1 million liters of water a day, every single day. Single chat from GDP can be the equivalent of about 1,000 searches. So everything in technology is we're saving the world by destroying the world. It's a wonderful talking point. Just use our AI or use our automation or etc. And the energy impacts of these systems is exponentially growing. And the whole model, the whole material model of technology is extraordinarily abusive of the Earth's materials. In a typical smartphone, there are 70 materials. 20 or 30 years ago in a smartphone, there were only 4 or 5 materials. That phone was much more easy to recycle. It's almost impossible to recycle a small phone with 70 materials in it. But basically, the way we have costed these materials means that the value of the old phone is practically zero as well. Somebody did a study, Brian Merchant, wrote a wonderful book called The One Device about the iPhone 6, which at that stage was retailing about $700. And he did an analysis of how much the raw materials for that iPhone cost. They cost $1. $1 for the aluminium, $1 for the lithium, $1 for all those 70 materials. No wonder we have horrible conditions in the mining industry globally when we take materials, these rare earth materials, etc., out at such extremely low cost. And the reason we're able to do that is we create massive quantities of waste. We don't clean up after ourselves in the mining process. Otherwise, it would be a lot more expensive. So the actual cost of the materials was 0.1 of 1% of an iPhone. A typical smartphone to mine these 70 materials will create about 90 kg of toxic waste. So that 130 grams in your hand caused 90 kg of toxic mining waste, 14,000 litres of water and 60 kg of CO2 to make it. We've made 16 billion smartphones since 2007. Of course, the whole model is planned obsolescence, designed them so they won't last in the process. That's the equivalent of 950 million tons of CO2, 1.4 billion tons of toxic waste, and 214 billion tons of water just for our smartphones in the process. So I want to give you a few models of thinking about the digital universe. There are 2 parts. There's the material part, where most of the damage actually occurs in the actual physical things that we design and that we use. And then there's the data, but they are interrelated because data drives the devices. Now we want 5G, etc., in the process. So to understand the impact of digital from a device point of view, we need to look at 3 areas: the making of it, and typically for a consumer device, 80% of the damage will occur in the manufacturing. If it's like a server in a data center, a commercial digital device, that's about 50%. But most of the damage of digital has occurred before you've even bought the thing. So if we want to do something about digital, it's hold on. We need smartphones that last 10 years. We need laptops that last 20 years in the process. So there's the manufacture, the making, the use, particularly for smartphones and laptops, tends to be relatively less damaging than the others. Still damaging, but because they're designed for the batteries to last, etc., the use doesn't tend to be as great from the energy usage of a particular device. As I said, about the end of life is very negative because we don't recycle. 5% recycling, but most of the damage is in the manufacturing, some of the damage is in the use, and a lot of the damage is in the end of life or the recycling environment. So this is how to understand the device. If we want to understand the data, there are 4 elements in understanding the impact of data. Of course, data drives the device. The more data, the more expensive and the more energy intense the device. But just looking at data for the moment, there are 4 aspects to understanding data's impact. There's the creation of the data, the amount of effort that goes into creating that data. And of course, all data is created through the use of devices. So you allocate something to the overall life impact of the device. So there's the creation, there's the streaming or the uploading. So there's the movement of that data to the server, whether that server's in the cloud or in a local system. And then there's the use by somebody who's accessing or using that data. And then there's the storage of that data over the actual long term. So most of the impact, even though streaming and storage are very significant numbers, most of it is a kind of invisible or hidden or rarely accounted for. It's in creating the actual article, the amount of hours that went into it, the amount of hours, the amount of computers that were used doing the research in the process. And the use can be absolutely massive if we've got a lot of users. So, for example, the Firefox browser, they did analysis of their overall carbon impact, and they found 99% of it was in on their user's device. And this is rarely calculated. The impact of what we create has on the people who actually use it. So from the data point of view, there's creation, streaming, use, and storage. From the device point of view, there's manufacturing, use, and end of life in the process. And we need to marry and understand all those impacts to get a true picture of the impact of digital. Everything is getting bigger, and it doesn't need to get 8K videos. You can't see on a screen more than 2K. Everything is getting unnecessarily big. The big artificial intelligence models are 100 times bigger than they really need to. It's just that AI researchers love to do big models and throw huge energy because they feel that they can do whatever they want with energy. There's no rules that apply to them. The same everywhere. Web pages, most of my career has been involved in the web. In 2005, a typical web page was about 0.4 of a megabyte. Now it's up to 24 megabyte on average. Many web pages are at least 16 megabytes in actual weight. A well-designed website, web page, typical web page, could be 100 kilobytes if it was properly designed. But it's not properly designed because we have the culture now today of developer convenience. We make everything easier for the developers by giving them big, clumsy frameworks that have massive weights to them. So we've become extraordinarily lazy. And in fact, we have not become extraordinarily lazy. We always were in the tech industry, very, very convenience and lazy driven, unless you go back to the 60s when we actually landed on the moon with much less processing power than is in a typical smartphone today. So there's massive waste in the whole connected digital industry. Programming. So thinking about these issues, everything in digital has an energy impact, either directly or indirectly. If we say the programming language C has an impact of 1, then C++ is 1.34, Java's almost 2, and JavaScript is 4 times. So JavaScript is almost 5 times more energy intense than C is in the process. The formats that we use, HTML is the most environmentally friendly way to communicate. 1,000 words in HTML is about 7 kilobytes. The same 1,000 words in a PDF is 63 kilobytes. So thinking about our formats and our uses. And I'd just like to leave you with a kind of a scale of impact. We should always be looking for the least energy intense way to communicate. And the most environmentally friendly way to communicate from a digital point of view is actually a text message. And a text file is the next best thing. So 1,000 words is about 6 kilobytes, but well-optimized HTML, it just adds another kilobyte to 1,000 words. You save it as a Word file, it's about 16, badly optimized HTML is about 50, and a PDF is over 60. So we're seeing, and all of this is 1,000 words of text. So if we move to images, they say, oh, images are great. Most images on the web, they have no real benefit in the process, but images are more energy intense. 1,000 words is about 2 A4 pages. So I created 2 images, each the size of an A4 page. At 150 DPI, that was 178. At 150 JPEG, 404. You go up into 300 DPI, you're at a megabyte. So the difference in a megabyte and 6 KB from the image point of view. Let's go to audio. So 1,000 words is about 4 minutes of audio in the process. Now we're at megabytes. So 4 megabytes, 8 megabytes, you go to WAV, it's 66 megabytes. But it's when you go to video that you really see the damage actually happening. So 1,000 words, 4 minutes of video, 24 frames per second, 55 megabytes. YouTube standard 70. Full definition, full HD, 110. But you go to 4K, it's almost a gigabyte. And 8K, it's 2.4 gigabyte. You can't even see the difference beyond 2K in the vast majority of screens in the process. So we have this behavior in the digital industry of wanton waste and the creation of stuff, not managing it, saving files, and that we're never going to use again, and we're going to hit a data crisis by 2030, and we really need to do something about it now. Digital is at this moment far from being a saver of crises and the planet. It is a hidden hand in the climate crisis for this and many other reasons. Thank you for listening.
Thanks. Thanks, Jerry, for this interesting contribution. Especially, I think you resumed with the first word, digital is physical. And so to understand this connection in terms of waste, energy consumption, etc., it is very important also to create, to shape different behavior in the relation with the technology. Many thanks for your contribution. Now I let the floor to Barbara Winkler. She is the coordinator and writer for Skeptical Science Organization, and she will share with us the importance of fighting climate misinformation, climate denial, with the use of interesting science, giving fact, producing knowledge, etc. Please, Barbara, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. So let me share my PowerPoint.
The green button, sharing screen.
Yeah. I see, and when I checked earlier, I had the option I saw the option for more, but it's currently not showing the, yeah, there it is. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, and go into. So it should be in presentation mode now.
No, it's not in presentation, but now, yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So first of all, thanks for the invitation to talk about skeptical science in this very interesting conference. I'll talk a bit about the background of the website, but the main focus is giving facts a fighting chance against climate, but also other misinformation. My name is Barbara Winkler, and I've been helping with skeptical science since 2010. So I'll talk a bit about the history of skeptical science, what we do, and then what we have to offer, materials that you can use in whatever activities you are involved with. And the presentation is link heavy. So when you get the upload, you will be able to jump to a lot of additional information that I'm not going to talk about due to time constraints. So a brief introduction to our website. It's an international website and also a non-profit science education organization. Skeptical Science was founded by John Cook in 2007. And we debunk misconceptions and misinformation about human-caused climate change. And for that, the website features a database with more than 200 rebuttals based on peer-reviewed literature. We are a team project and have volunteers around the globe. We also actively contribute to published research. So as I mentioned, Skeptical Science was founded in 2007 when John Cook published his rebuttal database sometime in July. And for the first 2 or 3 years, he was basically the sole maintainer of the website. And this changed in 2010 when a project required a lot more hands to help with the task, because the rebuttals had initially just existed in one level, which was fairly complex and sciencey. So the suggestion had been made to create more easy basic level rebuttals as well as more advanced. And through a help or call for help, the author team formed. It was also the year that I joined Skeptical Science, mostly to begin with to work on translations into German. So the following year was one of the most productive, with a lot of blog posts, a lot of rebuttals written, updated, whatever. And a lot of functionality was also added behind the scenes to the website. In 2013, led by John Cook, we published a study finding a 97% consensus about human-caused climate change. And we did several campaigns around that topic as well. And it's still one of the focuses of the website. In 2015, in collaboration with the University of Queensland, we launched the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course, Denial 101X, Making Sense of Climate Science Denial. And the MOOC is still ongoing. We are now running it in a self-paced mode, basically each year. In 2016, we were honored to receive the Friends of the Planet Award from the National Center of Science Education in the United States. And it was also the year that about a dozen from our team managed to meet in San Francisco during the American Geophysical Union's fall meeting, which was obviously great after working together with people online. 2017 saw our 10th birthday, and a couple of years later, more debunking resources were added with some published handbooks, but I'll talk about those later. In 2021, the Cranky Uncle game was launched, and I'll talk about the game as well on a later slide. And the game initially was created in English, but by now Cranky Uncle speaks 8 languages and 2 more are soon going to be launched. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the rebuttals are the backbone of skeptical science, and they tackle common misconceptions about global warming, such as it's not happening, it's not us, it's not bad, and it's too hard. And we have for most of them explanations in basic, intermediate, and advanced versions, and they reference the peer-reviewed primary research. And some of the rebuttals are regularly viewed, some more than 10,000 times per month. So we do have some challenges, because skeptical science and the content of the website is mostly maintained by volunteers. So it's not always easy to find helping hands for specific time-consuming and sometimes even rather mundane tasks, like something that we all like to do, fixing broken links, and also to keep the published materials current. And most of the rebuttals were initially created between 2007 and 2010. And for many of them, the content hadn't been properly updated for more than 5 years. So they, for example, still reference AR4 or 5 graphics from the IPCC reports. And this adds up to a rather big issue, with our rebuttals database, because if you want to counter climate myths and misinformation, the information that we provide should be as current as possible. And because of that, late last year into this year, we launched a rebuttal updates project, because we did get questions, not regularly, but sometimes, whether the stuff is still being updated. And on the other hand, skeptical science is often cited as the go-to resource when myths about climate change need to be debunked. So we created a bit of a factory, an assembly line, checked which rebuttals should be updated first, and also noticed that even the basic level definitions or writings were often a bit too sciencey, so that they were not necessarily easy to digest for people who hadn't been involved with science a lot or at all. So one thing that we added was an at-a-glance section that is visibly set apart. It doesn't have links, it doesn't have images, to not distract from the usually under 500 words summary of what the issue with a given myth is, so that as many people as possible who get to the rebuttal are able to understand it. And then there's additional details that gets more technical in the further detailed sections of the basic level rebuttal, and also in the intermediate and possibly existing advanced version. How long the at-a-glance section varied by topic, so some are long because it's a fairly technical concept that needs to be explained. And the other thing that we have on skeptical science are a lot of translations. Blog posts can be translated since 2009, as well as rebuttals. And for just about 40 rebuttals that we have currently in the pipeline, or which have already been updated, we have about 480 existing translations in up to 20 languages. So because we need help, because external help, ideally also from volunteers, we put out a call for help if somebody wants to join us in bringing the rebuttal translations into the current version as well. And we have resources into myth debunking of how that can be done. And one of the concepts is the Flick taxonomy of the techniques that are behind science denial. It is a framework that was originally proposed by Mark Hufnagel in 2007. And John Cook refined it. He came up with an abbreviation for the main five techniques: fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories, which is all stuff that you can identify in misinformation about climate change, but also other science topics. And John Cook also expanded the taxonomy so that it's now about 36, I think, that we have in the full list. And Flick became the underlying framework for our MOOC, Denial 101X. Flick is also available as a poster, which was created in collaboration with our German language partner website, klimafakten.de. So the first version was in German, but it was immediately followed by English, and more translations are available. They can be downloaded for free from the website. And the last 3 languages are about to go live in the next couple of days. John Cook, founder of Skeptical Science, has been involved over the years with writing several very helpful handbooks. So one of them is the Conspiracy Theory Handbook he wrote together with Stephen Lewandowski. And in the handbook, the popularity of conspiracy theories is explained. It provides guidance on identifying the traits of conspiratorial thinking, for which obviously, because everybody always needs an abbreviation, there's one here as well, conspire, but that only works in English. We weren't able to come up with good abbreviations in other languages. And this handbook is available in 18 translations as well. And more in the works. The debunking handbook is a bit of a consensus document written by 19 co-authors who are all researchers into debunking, pre-bunking, inoculation, to get a better handle on how to combat misinformation in all its forms. And misinformation, as you know, has the tendency to persist because it's easy to remember. So it needs to be debunked frequently and also effectively. And this handbook provides guidance on how to properly debunk if it cannot be pre-bunked. And it's also available in 18 languages apart from English. Yeah, and then there's the cranky uncle game. John Cook is now not just a cognitive scientist, but he's always also been a cartoonist. And with the cranky uncle character, he brings together his cartooning with his research into misinformation. And the culmination, if you will, of that is the cranky uncle game. It's a critical thinking game, and it builds resilience against climate misinformation. Players gain understanding by assuming the role of a cranky uncle, and cranky uncle also becomes the mentor. So he teaches players how he denies science and teaches the flick techniques. And players practice the denial spotting with earning cranky points when they answer quizzes properly. And as they advance through the cranky levels, their mood becomes increasingly crankier, just like cranky uncles. And it's available for iPhone, Android, and the browser. And while John was prototyping the game, he noticed that teachers were very keen to try it and to use it in classes. So he wrote the Teacher's Guide to Cranky Uncle, and that provides scientific background information about the game and also has suggestions for classroom activities. We do have a few translations, but more in the works. The game itself, as I already mentioned, has already been translated into 8 languages since being launched in 2021. And we are about to launch 2 more. And another one, a couple of other ones are in the pipeline as well at various stages. Skeptical Science is also involved in some other projects. I already mentioned our consensus study that was published 10 years ago. And for that, our team examined over 12,000 peer-reviewed abstracts to see whether the authors or the papers go along with the statement that current global warming is mostly caused by humans. Generated significant attention and also obviously attacks, because some people don't really like the consensus message and what a scientific consensus is. But regardless of that, the paper got awards like Best Article of 2013 from Environmental Research Letters. And there's a lot of information about the 97% consensus on skeptical science. I already mentioned the MOOC. It's currently running. We are happy if somebody joins. And our team provides assistance and moderation in the MOOC's online discussion forum, for example. And there are 60 lectures and a lot of expert interviews going into the basics of climate science and why and how these are still denied by some. The Computer-Assisted Recognition of Denial and Skepticism, or CARDS project, is a evolving activity that John Cook kicked off a couple of years ago, when our team, together with political scientists and machine learning experts, did some machine learn or training for the machine. And this is now more and more getting used and refined to detect climate misinformation in real time when it happens and where it happens. And just briefly, some other resources. Skeptical Science also publishes a blog post per day, not quite, but almost, with some ongoing series, which might be of interest for some of you, like the new research, which gets published each Thursday, summarizing and listing climate papers that have been published in the previous week. We do have a lot of graphics resources which come with a Creative Commons license, so you are free to use them in your own materials. There are also some animations available and some tools that were created over the years, some in connection with the Denial 101X MOOC, like the temperature tool, and also for our internal use, the Climate Science Glossary, which provides at the tip of a finger, basically, definitions for scientific terms, but also the references for scientific papers. As I briefly mentioned, Skeptical Science is recognized as a go-to resource. So in 2011, we got the Eureka Prize from the Australian Museum. I already mentioned the Friend of the Planet Award, and a lot of climate scientists send people our way if some climate misinformation needs to be debunked. And we do have some challenges. Some I already mentioned, time constraints, because our team is mostly volunteer-based. And we also are a target for various forms of attacks, mostly ad hominem, and also some conspiracy theories, some quite funny, of how we must be funded and things like that. And in 2012, the website was hacked badly when basically everything was dumped and our internal forum was published online. And some people that didn't shy away to quote mine, obviously from that forum content as well. So we do provide a lot of resources, but we can always also need help, like translation projects, and also with ongoing rebuttal updates, even if it's just reviewing the content, perhaps summarizing scientific articles in blog posts, or creating new rebuttals to counter solution denial where we don't yet have a lot of content. So if you are interested, there's our link to the contact form, or you just can touch base with me. So thanks for your interest and happy for any questions you might have.
Thanks to Barbel to share this interesting activity. I think democracy work with voluntary work. This is the very important element to make society more acceptable, and especially to work against the climate change denial. It is a very big machine. Thanks for your works. And now we move to the contribution of Angela Santese, Bologna for Climate Justice. She will share with us a reflection about Passante di Mezzo, something related to right of mobility, a collective redefinition of public space in Bologna. Please, Angela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to discuss the issue of Passante di Mezzo and the collective social and political reflection that has created in the city of Bologna on the redefinition of public space. I am going to divide this presentation into different parts. In the first one, I will give you some information on the project to enlarge the Passante di Mezzo, and in the second part, I will try to discuss the alternative model to this project that is being discussed by different local reality of the city of Bologna, including Bologna for Climate Justice, on behalf of which I am speaking today, in order to build in a collective way the rise of mobility. First of all, the so-called Passante di Mezzo is the project to enlarge, to widen the current freeway and the bypass, the orbital road that crosses Bologna just a few kilometers from the city center, for a total of 13 kilometers. The project plans to enlarge the structure from the current 12 lanes to up to 18 lanes in the central section, and to more 16 lanes in the remaining part, covering basically with tarmac 21 more hectares of land. And one of the official arguments by the people supporting the project is that the enlargement of the motorway will make the traffic flow more smooth. But this is not true, and this is not true due to the so-called induced traffic demand, which show how the widening of a motorway does not reduce traffic, but on the contrary, it increased traffic, because bigger motorways usually encourage the use of cars. And there are many studies in this regard, and also some practical example to prove this point. And the most famous one is related to the Katy Freeway in Houston. The freeway was enlarged up to 20 lanes in 2011, costing almost $3 billion. And after a few years, the studies show that the travel time on the same highway was increased by 30%. And also the estimation for the Passante di Mezzo, basically, they go in the same way, because the same Autostrade per l'Italia basically said that actually an average of 155,000 vehicles travel on the Passante each day, but according to the estimates that were presented during the design phase of the project, after the enlargement, 180,000 vehicles will transit the Passante each day, so more than 65 million every year. In the discussion around the issue of the Passante, the mayor of Bologna has defined the Passante di Mezzo as the symbolic infrastructure of the ecological transition. But according to different local realities busy in providing an alternative model to this project, including Bologna for Climate Justice, a motorway has nothing to do with ecology, because indeed the current infrastructure produces 40% of the traffic pollution in the municipality of Bologna, and after the enlargement this percentage will rise to 50%, and at the same time the CO2 emission will also increase, reaching the amount of 266,000 tons per year in 2040. And in the agenda through which the City Council of Bologna approved the project were suggested some environmental compensation and mitigation measures, but these measures are basically useless and in any case irrelevant. And furthermore, most of these proposals about compensation measures have been postponed to a generic second phase of the project, for which neither the timing nor the funds that are actually available are clear. And Already 10 years ago, during the construction of the third dynamic lane, the installation of control units for the detection of pollutant was foreseen in the environmental impact assessment of the infrastructure, but this installation never happened. And in the last month, citizens have asked also for an health impact assessment to be carried out in order to understand how much the passante actually has an impact on citizen health, but this request was denied both by the municipality of Bologna and also by the Emilia-Romagna region. So, which is the alternative to the passante di mezzo, and which is the alternative to the model that the passante di mezzo embodied for our city and for our region. This project is not, as the mayor said, the symbolic infrastructure of the ecological transition, but on the contrary, is the symbolic infrastructure of climate injustice, because this project does not take into consideration the health of the people that are living along the infrastructure, also because it prevents the transformation of the regional and national system of transportation, and finally because it undermine any project of radical change in local mobility. All the realities and the group that are struggling against this project provide an alternative model in which being able to move in a free way is a right that everyone should enjoy. And for this reason, the public transportation system cannot be understood as a service, but must be understood as a collective good, which must be also accessible to anyone. And this, of course, imply the establishment of solidarity fair policies with low cost for everyone. It means also to allow everyone to move in a free way and to transform the public transportation option in the most convenient solution also from the economic point of view. But this alternative model imply also the fact that this system must be efficient, must give the possibility to people to travel not only in the city center, which is always usually the focus of investment in the public system transportation, but it must allow the possibility to travel in all the districts of the city and also in the whole metropolitan area. In other words, mobility can become a central element of climate transition only if this mobility is understood starting from the needs of the people that live in a specific area, in that case in the area of Bologna. On the contrary, the argument of the people opposing the project, including Bologna for Climate Justice, is that the enlargement of the passante di mezzo, the construction is that with the widening of the passante di mezzo, the construction of a tramway network, the diffusion of bike lane, I don't know, the purchase of electric public transportation, the lowering of speed limits, and also other city policies will only be marginal policies, because there is a huge contradiction in the way in which the municipality of Bologna is basically addressing this issue, because on the one hand, the use of the car is promoted. New infrastructure are created in order to support the promotion of the use of private cars, and this will just increase the traffic and also the CO2 emission. So there is somehow an effort in promoting the culture, the same culture of possessing a private car. On the other hand, all the initiatives that could change the way we travel are, yes, of course, promoted, but these initiatives are weakened by the contradictory choices that are made by the municipality, and which basically condemn Bologna to both traffic and pollution. For this reason, any reflection on the mobility issue cannot be done without taking into adequate consideration the opposition to the widening of the motorways, which will basically be responsible for the worsening of the quality of the quality of life of the people living there, which will put at risk the health of tens of thousands of people, and also which will also contribute to the causes of global warming. There are other European experiences which basically show how the tram, the buses, the bike lane and low speed limits can be truly a huge part of an ecological transition, but only if at the same time, together with all these initiatives, other transport infrastructure are removed from the city. The public transportation service must become the prevailing way of getting around, and it also must go hand in hand with the closure to cars, with the closure to cars traffic of large areas of the city, to the reduction on the possibility of parking, and basically the street must be somehow returned as public space to people, to communities, to neighborhood, to sociality, and be transformed in that way in spaces of inclusion. And in the area of Bologna, the interconnection between the metropolitan railway system, the trams, the collective road transport, and also the infrastructure for cycling must allow for the removal of private motor vehicles, and also it's necessary to promote the interchange between means of transport that make the use of car less and less convenient, also with the aim of reducing emission, improving the quality of life, and also improving the individual and collective well-being of the population of the area. The other aspect of this issue is, of course, related to the logistics sector, for which the passante and the motorways are enlarged. And so the logistics sector must cease to be one of the sectors that assure profit through exploitation, and also became a common good that can be that can improve the quality of life of all the people living in the area. In that sense, the solution that is often being proposed, the one of electric driving, is not enough to make the system acceptable from the environmental and social point of view, because like public transport, the delivery of products must also be a collective good, able of favoring the people who need it most, of assuring the quality of whoever is employed there, to be somehow an integral part of the redefinition of the public space, and also to support the neighborhood economies. And as long as the home delivery system is the prerogative of platform and private multinational, it will be impossible to somehow change the system, and we will continue to have hundreds and hundreds of vans driven by exploited drivers. So I'm going to conclude by saying that according to the different realities involved in the struggle against the Passante project, mobility cannot be considered just an infrastructural issue, because mobility has to do with the social, economic, and also the environmental dimension of the city. And mobility actually can be an instrument for inclusion, or on the contrary, for discrimination, for climate transition, or global warming, can be an instrument of improvement, or also an instrument for the deterioration of the quality of life. And this depends on how the issue of mobility is addressed, taking or not taking into consideration the issues that are claimed by the people living in that specific area. So in the last years, in the city of Bologna, there is a plural discussion going on now to make the theme of mobility a conflictual space, but a space that is able of claiming, it's able to claim free local public transportation for all, but also the strengthening of public line, the collective and inclusive redefinition of the public space, but at the same time also the protection of the rights and the quality of the employment conditions of the people that work in this sector. So it cannot be addressed just as an issue related to the further development of huge infrastructural projects. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Massimo, the microphone.
Many thanks, Angela, to share the experience of making more livable one city like Bologna. I think the challenge of mobility, the challenge of quality of public space, and the implication for climate justice are very connected. It is an interesting challenge. Many thanks. Now we leave the floor to Alex Foti. He is a climate activist. He is coordinating a World Congress for Climate Justice in Milan in October. And so he will present this interesting challenge of bring people from different parts of the world to come in Milano in October to reflect about climate justice and especially the role of a movement. The challenge of climate justice is a challenge in the hand of people, in the hand of movement. It is an important role of a grassroots movement, and how Pedro Vermelho in the beginning, we should overcome the state and take in the hand.
Only movements will decarbonize the earth.
Yes, we should decarbonize. So the floor is yours. Thanks to stay with us all the afternoon. Alex, the floor is yours, please.
Wow, thanks to have invited me to this academic conference on climate justice. I especially thanks Edoardo and the Professor De Marchi of the Jean Monnet Excellence Center for Climate Justice. What we're trying to do on October 12 and 15 in Milano, in the State University at Leoncavallo, the first social centers in Italian history, is to create the first green anti-capitalist international. We're going to bring Ende Gelände, we're going to bring Defend Atlanta Forest, we're going to bring Rise Up Movement Africa, we're going to bring Futuros Indígenas, and many other organizations, Climaximo from Portugal. All Bologna for Climate Justice is an initial backer of this project, just like the Torino Climate Social Camp, whose second edition is going to take place at the end of July. Basically, I don't want to bore you with logistical details. Maybe I'll just go a little bit at the end in the mechanics and how it works, so you can better understand. I put a link on the chat like there is an article that explains what's happening, and the whole program of the conference, the Congress, the World Congress, there is delegates, 200 delegates from all regions of the earth. You can read that, and so I'm gonna start with a kind of simple PowerPoint. I mean, given the intellectual sophistication I've witnessed here, and I'm gonna try to share my screen, which for me is a hard thing to do. Do you see like what I'm seeing? I should start with the presentation. Wait, presentation start.
Should share the green
dall'inizio.
button.
Lo vedete?
No, the green button.
Io l'ho schiacciato.
But
aspetta.
Schermo 1.
Condividi schermo. Non lo vedo il... Io lo diamo strada. Ok. Guarda un po' così. Così lo vedete? Ok.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, well, whatever. I mean, I feel guilty now that Jerry's has like published the data of waste, energy waste to do.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, full screen. Thank you.
Can I keep going? No.
Yes, but in a full screen mode.
Like the presentation, you mean?
Yes.
Così? Va bene?
Yes, thank you.
So I'm not really a PowerPoint person. I mean, I write and that's it, my content. But anyway, I did like this mid-journey thing. So what's happening since 2018, and Vanessa, of course, has been a protagonist of this, has been like the new climate trinity, we can call it. Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, and the A22 movements in Italy, Ultima Generazione, which sits on the committee of the World Congress, have propelled climate justice movements into a new phase, which is growing more confrontational and more repressive since the pandemic, okay? I mean, there has been a huge repression in France, of course, the dissolution of Soulèvement. We've seen Greta being taken away by cops at Lützerath within the Gelände, and recently Malmo. There is, I mean, the more the climate crisis bites, the more repressive the states become, and the only people that speak truth to power, climate justice activists. Okay. So who are responsible, basically? Who are the two prophets of this new wave, these two people? I mean, Greta, here in Milano in 2021, there is the mayor of Milano also with the mask. And then Roger Hallam. Roger Hallam maybe is a bit less known, founder of Extinction Rebellion, and then founder of Just Stop Oil. And who's now launching a terrified scream after Rockstrom and James Hansen have published their latest papers, saying basically that by 2070, 1/3 of humankind might be in threat for survival. And so, like, the importance, okay, Roger Hallam might come. I mean, we've already had 2 talks. He's interested in coming to Milan, and has a plan for the revolution in 12 podcasts of 2 hours. If you have the patience, it's really interesting, and it's climate disobedience that's working. Definitely in the UK and in Italy too. It has put climate justice in the TV debates. Okay, I'm going too slow, or how am I doing? I have 20 minutes, but okay, so it'd be okay. So Ultima Generazione here in Milan. Okay, these 2 people are also in the committee, incidentally. But anyway, so Milano has been theater like other cities on earth of Just Stop Oil type of artivism. In our Congress, the first day is devoted to artivism. I'm not saying Ultima Generazione is an artivist collective, but say that, you know, aesthetic gestures, for example, by the Institute of Radical Imagination and Salad Dogs in Venice, the Art Institute. And we'll also have Jay Jordan with a Laboratory of Insurrectional Imagination. Okay, but still, I mean, these movements in 2018 didn't happen in a void. I mean, there has always been a strong anarcho-autonomist tendency fighting capitalism on ecological, environmental justice ground, etc. I mean, today, what are the three main, self-avowedly anti-capitalist movements? And we have, I mean, in my humble opinion, I have enucleated three. It's Defend Atlanta Forest, that since the murder of Tort, it has catalyzed the whole North American environmental movement around the cause of Stop Cop City, because the forests of Atlanta were like the majority Black population likes to hang out. We should be raised down to accommodate like an experimental cop training center. And the Gelände, we're gonna see slides, so for whoever doesn't know them, but I'm pretty sure. And the Gelände is the German autonomist movement that fights coal mines, open pit coal mines. And it has existed since 2015, and we already mentioned Lützerath. And then there is Soulèvement de la Terre, who's like in the news now. Also, Greta Thunberg went to Conseil d'État to file against the dissolution that the Minister of Interior, Darmanin, has disposed a week ago. I mean, it's also like the first time an environmental movement gets dissolved with these new anti-terrorist laws. And I mean, there's many members being persecuted. What's interesting of Soulèvement de la Terre, it's an umbrella federation of movements that goes from Zadist types, more confrontational, antagonistic in their street fighting attitude, to La Confédération Paysanne di Joseph Bové, to Greens and other rural association. It's really composite. So, I mean, 10,000 people say they belong to Soulèvement de la Terre. So it's like dissolving an organization. I was mentioning Tort, Tortuguita, the climate act, I mean, the anarcho-ecologists, let's call it the right way, who was murdered by the Georgia State Patrol on January 18, as he was camping inside the Willany forest, who, like the forest defenders, are trying to do. We'll have 6 people probably from Atlanta coming. And I mean, the city has just voted, I mean, to connect to Bologna for climate justice. The city has just voted to maintain the project, but the communities have filed a city referendum. So we'll see how this plays out in the next months. And they also went, Atlanta Forest defenders went to help Zapatistas with the Tren Maya, and so did Lützerath Eco Village. So I mean, the Congress exists to bring transnationalism first and forefront again, because we've lost that thing since 2011. I mean, after the Indignado Tahrir wave, we kind of lost the internationalist drive. I mean, and in climate justice movements, I mean, it's essential, evidently. Okay, this is like a pic from, the huge machinery that Ende Gelande's white overalls have to confront. They've scored good successes managing to shut down a few mines in the Ruhr, but not Lützerath, because the Greens shamefully let the SPD go ahead with resuming the coal, which was the price of stopping nuclear. Okay, so Ende Gelände will be Milano. How we're doing? I'm late. 40. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, this is like Saint-Soulin. These are like water reservoirs, water pools in the Loire. So basically, these black blocs are fighting against like the monopolization of water by agribusiness, supported by the rural communities, including the European MEP of that area. But actually, the conservative federations are against Soulèvement de la Terre. So this is the latest confrontation. There were 2 people sent in a coma. It was after this that the Minister of Interior labeled them as eco-terrorists and started the dissolution phase. Okay, so after what we said, we can say, we can say there are, or we can say, if we haven't said it, we'll say now, there are 3 cycles of climate justice activism. The first wave is like the post-Seattle one. I mean, Earth Liberation Front on one side, I mean, which was the most extreme manifestation, but, you know, several other, you know, Turtles and Teamsters United. This was like the union movement, the labor movement, the environmental movement together against the neoliberal globalization. Then there is like the second phase, which I mobilized directly for. We sent buses from Milano to Copenhagen. And that was the first time that, you know, like a radical movement came together, you know, the climate justice action to, you know, break into the climate summit, which, I mean, didn't do anything. I mean, and, you know, our spokespersons were jailed, but then they had to be freed because the public opinion was against them. And then there is like the third wave, which I've tried to detail, which will be the protagonist of the World Congress for Climate Justice, which we hope will become an institution of climate justice movements, and another city on earth, be it Bogota or Lisbon, will take turn into hosting and advancing the cause of revolution against fossil capitalism, because this is, in a way, an ideological congress, merging, you know, let's say, street activists that have a penchant for books with academics that have a penchant for activism. And, you know, the idea is, I mean, I think there are several thematic assemblies, 8, and I take care of like the ideology one. The idea is to federate, I mean, strategically, intersectionally, for what we can, the main radical traditions of environmentalism, that is eco-Marxism, let's say Kohei Saito and Andres Malm, or, you know, green anarchy, Zadism, which we mentioned, and, you know, the tradition of mass civil disobedience that Harlem and these people embody. Definitely, I mean, Ende Gelände is, I mean, Andreas Malm has participated many times in Ende Gelände's actions. And so to federate, we've invited groups from all these traditions. It's a north-south thing in the sense that at least, I mean, compatibly with our budget, but we have the help of the Jean Monnet Center sending also activists. We'll have at least 30 activists from outside Europe. Most of the delegates, 150, will be from outside Italy. And so we build on also the Venice Climate Camp and similar experiences to build a deliberative moment where we can coin common buzzwords, we can do common actions together, draft common documents, and, you know, design common campaigns, and especially a transnational mechanism of solidarity vis-a-vis repression. When there is a climate crisis, we gotta be ready. Like we were ready for Romagna, and you know, they were ready in New Orleans, ready in the sense the people self-organize themselves in the face of crisis and build counterpower. The idea is that we can single out objectives and focuses, also the European level, that advance the cause of the revolution against fossil capital. By the precariat, for the precariat. And I think I exhausted my time. It's been long, and whatever, I hope I covered the ground you want me to cover. Hello?
Thanks, Alex, for this presentation, and also for launching the need to connect these multitude of action in different places of the world. You resumed the 3 main sites of action in the last years: France, Germany, USA. Today we had also more site like EACOP, Uganda, Tanzania.
Yes.
The movement of Ecuador.
See, I saw. It was incredible. Pedro, if you're still here. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, there is a delegation from East Africa who will do a topic op seminar at the Congress. This is very important. Also, there's a guy from Congo and also like a peasant unionist, Massacone from Mali, representing also Federated Via Campesina. No, sorry, I mean, just...
No, I think it's very important to create this connection between the movement of climate justice, the movement for food sovereignty, and the different movement for urban quality and the different federation on the action related to environmental conflicts. We collected some questions during this afternoon. There are some questions related to for Pedro, for Yoshi, and also some more detail. There are people asking for some more detail about the event in Milano, but we can share the link to the Congress in Milano. I think this will be available at the end of this presentation. Thanks for all people participating at this event today. All the material will be available in the website of the Monnet Center of Excellence. Tomorrow we have a second step of this meeting, and then we invite you to continue from one side to be aware about what is happening. I think today the contribution of skeptical science, the experience of the city of Bergen, and the activity of EACOP, what is happening in Ecuador, etc., can give us a lot of opportunity to understand what are good practices for transformation. We collected in the website of Climate Justice, Monnet Center of Excellence, a good contribution of good practices related to change. There are many options, many opportunities. Everything is useful in this moment. What I think is important is to create a connection between movement and the people. And we invite you to continue the action. Maybe we can meet with some of you in Milano and also in the next opportunity where people are acting for change. We should stay there. Especially, I ask you to everybody to help in some way the action of Ecuador. There will be some campaign ongoing. Attack Europe is collecting resources, funding to support the action of Ecuador. And so I think there is a lot of opportunities to do. I think the most unjust way of doing something is to do nothing. Okay, and we have many options to do something and to cooperate to the change. Many thanks, and see you to next opportunity to meet. And the opportunity to meet as very big, and firstly to Milano, October 2023.
See Yasuni.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao Padua, ciao a tutti amici. Ciao Barbara.
Ciao Alex.
Ciao
Barbara. Ciao Barbara.
Ciao
Barry.
Thanks Master X.
Angela.